Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 21st, 2023 Planning and Zoning Board meeting. If we might all stand for a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence. Meg, if you might take a roll call, please.
Mr. Quish is excused. I do not see Ms. Austin. Mr. Anderson.
Present.
Mr. Cassignoli. Sorry. Mr. Hirsch.
Here.
Mr. Cater.
Present.
Mr. Collegian.
Present.
Mr. Mortimer.
Present.
Mr. Zahridis.
Present.
And Vice Chairman Sadi.
Present. So we have two matters that we need to address before we start with the new business. The first is welcoming Brian Anderson as a new member of the board. Thank you for showing up tonight in the rain, and we enjoy it. We'll look forward to the work that you have. Secondly, for those in the public that are here, 0 Seaview Avenue, which is on the new business, is being postponed. And in reference to two matters, a reg change at 23-6 Subway and 325 Subway, per the applicant's request, those both have been postponed to December 5th. So if you're here for any of those three matters, they're not going to be heard tonight. As I've indicated, the zone change and the application for special permit at 325 Subway will be postponed to December 5th. So the next matter that we have, and the first matter in business, is new business, 3 Anderson Avenue. Vote by January 12th of 2024. And this is a Zone R12 petition of Alexandra Mock for a coastal site plan review on map 082, block 791, parcels 2, of which Caroline Schiff is the owner.
Good evening, Alexandra Mock, environmental consultant. And I'm going to be walking you through my slides and through the proposed project. So the second slide.
Before you do, Mr. Chair, just for the record, the applicant's parent and I are in the same firm, although we don't conduct business with one another. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I don't think it's a conflict.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
And if you would just, you got your name, but your address, please.
44 Lou Allen Road, Stamford, Connecticut, 06902.
Thank you very much, and you can continue with your presentation.
So here's the bird eye view of the property, and if you can just look at closer, in the very center we have the residence. We have 2 sheds on this side, and also we have a garage. Oh, you don't see my cursor, sorry for that. So to the left, we have 2 sheds and a detached garage. We have a driveway in between, and then there's a main residence. Then to the left, or to the right actually, when we go a little bit slower, let me see whether not my cursor, no. When we go to the right, we see our coastal environment, and what we have there, it's vegetated, is the beach and dune environment. You can see some vegetation here, and we will take a closer look to what's there. So here are the pictures of, next slide please. Here are the pictures of the coastal area, and to the left you have American beach grass, and behind it you have Rosa rugosa, which are both typical plants for the dunes. They really like sandy soils and salt splash. To the right, we have a little view of the water, and then this is the view from the property. Please notice that we have a fence, which is all covered with invasive vines, but the fence is kind of a barrier and really good demarcation between what's going on around the house and the backyard and the natural environment outside. Next slide, please. So here's our proposed improvements. Can you go to the slideshow so we can see the whole slide? So what we see here in orange is the main house, and the main house is going to be preserved, and which is a good thing because we're going to be creating a very small carbon footprint by preserving the main house. In yellow, all the little bit lighter orange around the main residence, we have additions, which are going to be two-story additions. In purple, we have a garage, which is going to have also second floor. And then in the green, we have porches. And in brownish gray, we have a patio in the back, which is the upper right. The areas which I highlighted in blue are going to be removed. So from the upper left, we have the garage and sheds. And then the driveway is going to be modified. So a large portion of it is going to be removed or taken over by the proposed garage. And the new driveway is going to have a slightly different footprint than the old one. Next slide, please. So we are going to have increase of 1,350 square feet of impervious surface. We are not proposing any of the in-ground infiltration system. The engineering department decided that it's not really needed at this point because the soil is very permeable and we are not expecting that there will be runoffs. And since the property in general slopes towards the water, there's no actually way of flooding or creating any issues to the neighbors. And the slide which we are showing right now is the revised plan. The engineering asked us for several things to be added to the plan. So to the right, you have in yellow is the coastal jurisdiction line of the EP. In the purple, in the middle, we have two different flood zones, which are shown. So we have AE to the right, elevation 14. In the middle, we have AE elevation 13. And then to the left, we have flood X. Also, when you can please move to the house, we're supposed to be adding or showing where the water line is, and in blue is shown the water line which leads to the house and actually is already existing there because the house is going to be preserved as indicated. Also, there was a question about what's the area of shorelands. So the area is 14,103 square feet. And vice versa, the beach and dune area is 8,010 square feet. So these are those two environments we have on our property. And this is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions by the members of the board before we get the administrative summary? Seeing none, David, would you give us your administrative summary, please?
The applicant is proposing to expand an existing dwelling. The building coverage is 14.6%, where 30% is permitted. Lot area coverage is 20%, where 45% is permitted. Building height is 34 feet 5 inches. There are no expected adverse impacts to coastal resources. The city engineer recommends some additions, clarifications to the submitted materials. The application is substantially zoning compliant.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions after hearing the administrative summary? Seeing none, looking to my left and my right, I would take a motion, please.
I move to approve as presented the petition of Alexandra Amok for a coastal site plan review on map 082, block 791, parcels 2, of which Carolyn Schiff is the owner.
We have a second. Mr. Cater raised his hand. I'll note a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Meg, if you would take the roll, please.
Mr. Anderson,
With the motion?
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Cater,
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis,
With the motion.
and Vice Chairman Sadi.
I am also with the motion. Good luck on the project. It looks like it's going to be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So we're now into public hearings. The first one on the agenda would be 695 West Avenue, a zone CDD1, petition of Thomas Lynch Esquire for a special permit with site plan review for an automotive repair facility on map 043, block 334, parcel A4 of which 695 West LLC is the owner. This would indicate close by November 22nd and vote by January 25th, 2024. Is that the accurate closing date, Attorney Lynch?
Mr. Sulcos would know that better than me.
Yeah, because this had been put
It's been
off.
postponed. Right?
Yeah, so if,
So it's,
Fair enough.
we're here for a vote. So.
Thank you very much. Okay.
All right.
Attorney Lynch, we'll listen to you. Thank
All
you
right,
very
thank
much.
you so much. And just for the record, my name is Thomas Lynch. I'm an attorney with the law firm Lynch, Trimbicki and Boynton, and my office is located here in Milford at 63 Cherry Street. And I have the pleasure tonight of being here with my client, David Esposito. Dave is the owner of the property at 695 West Avenue. He operates under the LLC Bootsy Gear, and it's a sort of a boutique Porsche high-end automobile repair facility that he wants to have on this property. So we filed an application pursuant to the CDD1 regulations for a special permit and site plan approval to allow the use in this building. So a little bit of background. My client purchased the property during COVID in 2020. The parcel is approximately a half an acre in size. It's some 22,000 square feet. As I mentioned, it's located in the CDD1 zone, which is the commercial corridor district running from the intersection at Bridgeport Avenue out to Interstate 95. It's a mixed commercial zone allowing for a wide variety of uses, one of which, with a special permit, is a vehicle repair facility, and that's what we're before you tonight. David has up on the screen the survey, the site plan. There will be no site improvements as part of this application. My client bought the building and is going to operate his facility within the confines of the building. There'll be no addition to it. There'll be no renovations to the exterior, other than doing some site work that was required to be done by the city engineer upon review of these plans, as I'll mention in just a minute. We submitted a statement of use, which I hope you all had the opportunity to read. It's pretty brief, but my client's going to operate on site Mondays through Fridays from 10 a.m. to 6. He's got 3 technicians who will be working with him on the cars. It's a very low volume operation, so there's only 2 or 3 cars on any daily basis that'll be worked on site. So there'll be no storage of automobiles outside, even though there is a paved area of some 600 square feet that's located adjacent to the bays to the garage. But there will be no work performed outside. There'll be no storage of cars outside. We also submitted to you on the plan It was revised after review from the city engineer because if you drove by the building, you probably saw there were some parking spaces that were located along West Avenue. And upon obtaining the survey, it was determined that those parking spaces are actually located within the city's right-of-way. So they're going to be removed. There's also some stumps that are located there that I assume were put in many years ago. The building itself was built in 1954. They may have been put in there as protection or some sort of pseudo guardrail to protect from cars coming around that curve at West Avenue from hitting the building, but those are going to be removed as well because they are within the city right away. I'm told by my client that the cars that are there now, they're not his employees or any cars being parked there as part of his operation, but there's a multifamily building across the street where tenants use that area to park cars on occasion, and they're going to be instructed that they can't do that anymore. Those spaces are going to be removed. We also submitted, and David has on the screen, the floor plan. The first floor, the building itself is some 12,000 square feet. It's 10,000 square feet on the open area on the first floor, and there's a mezzanine on the second floor that has offices and a bathroom, a small mezzanine. The majority of the quote-unquote second floor area is open space looking down to the garage area on the first floor. So most of the utilization of the building is going to be the 10,000 square feet on the first floor. It's open garage with some areas designated as staff break rooms and a locker room and a bathroom. And those are all shown on the plans. But again, I stress to you, there's not going to be any additional construction. As David noted in his review, which he will go over with you in a minute, with a special permit, this is a zoning compliant use in the CDD1 zone under section 316.23, and then per section 542, the section of our regulations that talks about approval of gasoline stations or vehicle dealerships or vehicle repairs, you need a minimum of 20,000 square feet in terms of lot size, 22,000 square feet in terms of lot size to be permitted to operate a business such as this on a site. This site is some 24,158 square feet, so it meets the terms of that particular regulation. You've also been given copies of all the department reviews. On September 5th, the police department, Sergeant Craniac, issued a review memo to you saying that he's found that with sight lines and the existing use of or the proposed use of the building, it doesn't pose any traffic problem, and his report was adopted and approved by the Police Commission at its October meeting. As I mentioned, the city engineer reviewed the plans. We have a September 14th review that Greg Podleski had made of the plans. The plans were revised in accordance with his review. The plans were submitted to the zoning office on October 17th with the survey revised to show that those parking spaces were removed. The city engineer also had a question as to whether or not there were floor drains in the building. There are not, and that was noted on the plans. And then lastly, there was, again, this issue of the stumps in front of the building. He required that they be removed and taken out of the city right away. The Sewer Commission administratively approved the application that I submitted to them in October. There's a memo in your file from October 27th. And then lastly, for the purposes of issuing a zoning permit, the fire department issued a conditional approval. Tim Sudden, who's our new fire marshal, is going to be meeting with my client because there's a question as to whether or not the size of the area where he's working on cars requires under the state and local building code sprinklers. I'm told that if there's an open area in excess of 5,000 square feet where automobiles are going to be worked on inside of a building, then sprinklers are going to be required. So again, for the purpose of tonight's hearing, the fire department issued a memo saying that it's conditionally approved, subject to the possibility of sprinklers having to be installed. Other than that, it's a straightforward application to you. This is, again, the commercial zone that allows a variety of uses, and as you've all driven up and down the Post Road, you know that there's many vehicle repair facilities. My client is anxious to get his approval from you so he can move forward. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Thank you very much, Attorney Lynch. Any questions? Mr. Hirsch?
Attorney Lynch, good evening.
Hi.
How is your client going to operate a auto repair facility without floor drains?
Good question. It's in our statement of use that both automobile coolant and oil is kept in containers, and then they have a off-site company that comes in and takes it away. So,
Thank you.
great question. I should have picked up on that in the statement of use. Yep.
Mr. Mortimer?
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, a pretty basic application, like you said. I'm just wondering, those parking spaces, what actions are going to be taken to signify that they are no longer parking?
The line striping, or
Right.
that's going to be removed?
I mean, are signs going up?
Right.
or-
No parking, sure. Right on the side of the building.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I do have a question, if it could, please. Me, the chair, for
Go ahead.
tonight. Bob Sadie, we
Bob,
met before.
you're right in front of me.
Yeah.
How can I miss you?
Sometimes that happens, too.
No, not you.
Anyway, Inland Wetlands got involved. Could you just briefly explain, when we get a report, why they were involved?
Well, they're on the list of departments that David sends out a department transmittal to, so that letter from Mary Rose was just her standard letter saying there's nothing on this site that involves any review by her office nor any permits or applications from her office.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you. Any other questions? So, Dave, we can get your summary, please?
This is the summary of the Department of Permitting and Land Use, and not my summary. This is an application to permit the continued use of a repair facility through special permit as is required by Section 3.16.2.3 in the CDD-1. The applicant is proposing no site work and no alterations to the building. 695 West Avenue is an existing one-story masonry building of approximately 10,500 square feet with a mezzanine of 2,200 square feet for a total approximate square footage of 12,700 square feet. There are 14 parking spaces that are partially on the parcel and in the public right-of-way. A revised survey and site plan indicates these spaces are being removed. An existing paved loading area, informal parking area of approximately 6,200 square feet is on site. All automotive repair work is performed within the building. The site has 24,158 square feet, which makes the change of use compliant with sections 3.16.2.3 and 5.4.2 of the zoning regulations. A formal signed statement of use has been provided. The application is substantially zoning compliant with the zoning regulations.
Thank you very much. Are any other questions to Attorney Lynch based on hearing what Mr. Sulkus told us? Seeing none, I'll take a motion, please.
I move to approve as presented the petition of Thomas Lynch, Esquire, for a special permit with site plan review for an automotive repair facility on map 043, block 334, parcel A4, of which 695 LLC is the owner.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mr. Hirsch? Meg, if you can call the roll, please.
Mr. Anderson,
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch,
With the motion.
Mr. Cater,
With the motion.
Mr. Kalijian,
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer,
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharides,
With the motion.
and Chairman Sadi.
The motion, thank you.
It's approved, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Hank. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you. So the next matter on our agenda is 25 Shell Avenue, Zone 7-5. Petition of Timothy Hollister Esquire for a site plan with a CAM for a 20-unit residential building proposed under CGS 8-30G, on map 27, block 444, parcel 16, of which Seashell LLC, CO Fortitude Capital LLC is the owner. Now, if you could just step back from the mic for a minute, Mr. Hollister, I must make a statement, and in accordance with CGS 22A-19, Robert Fuchs of 17 Shell Avenue has asserted their right to intervene. After discussion with the city attorney's office and the city planner reviewed the petition, they found to be properly before the board for the purpose of raising claimed environmental issues. As such, the intervener is authorized to participate in the proceedings as a party, which means that they'll be allowed to be seated to our right as we're looking into the public's left. Pursuant to 2218 of the Planning and Zoning Board's, the scope of review is to determine whether the intervener, the proposed activity, has proved that the proposed activity will or is reasonably likely to cause unreasonable pollution of the state's air, water, or other natural resources, and 2, there are prudent and feasible alternatives to the proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources. Is the intervener present and represented by counsel? Yes. Would counsel come forward and identify ourselves through the microphone originally, please?
Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Keith Ainsworth. I'm an environmental and land use attorney from New Haven with offices at 51 Elm Street. I
So
represent...
what I was going to say, thank you for identifying yourself. You can be seated on the far table. There's a microphone over there. You push the red button if it's your time to be heard.
All right. Thank you.
And you can make a statement then if you want to, too, but but you can be seated over there.
Thank you. I will.
You're welcome. So through the board members, what that means is that there will be 2 independent findings if we decide to go forward tonight. One is whether the intervener has met their burden of proof. And secondly, if that is met, then we have to make a decision on the actual application, 25 Shell Avenue. Now, if I could please, Mr. Hollister, I'm probably going to need both of you to assist us at some point on this particular first issue.
Mr. Zadi,
Yes, sir.
I believe another attorney in the audience also raised his hand.
I think that was with the intervener. Is there a separate attorney?
That was Robert Fuchs, my client.
Okay. Okay. So this is all new for us. It may well be for you, Attorney Hollister. But the point that I have now is that the panel, the board, may have some questions of counsel. And I think it's appropriate we listen to him briefly to start before your presentation, unless you think it's a different way we should go.
Okay. Good evening, Attorney Tim Hollister, representing the applicant. And first thing I'm going to do is apologize for my voice, which is kind of going to go like this tonight. We're aware of the intervention petition and a supporting letter, and I believe all of you have a response that was prepared by CODIS Bodie. So I think if we're going to address the environmental intervention petition first, have Attorney Ainsworth go first, and then we'll respond substantively. And then I think we also have to address the traffic peer review before we...
I agree with that part.
Yeah.
Is that I imagine you might have done these before.
I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And so I guess that the questions that the chair and other members of the board may have is, what is you have a burden of proof, but what is the standard that we'd have to use?
Okay. It's the same standard you have for any application, which is we need to give you evidence, substantial evidence in the record upon which you can make your determination. Just like you're making a determination on the application, you would make one on the intervention. The intervention raises environmental issues under the Environmental Protection Act. There's no special way that they're done. You could have the intervener present at any particular order. your chosen order of having us go first is fine. But the way it works is we present to you our arguments and our evidence, and then the applicant goes and has his rebuttal, and perhaps there's maybe a little back and forth depending on what the commission has for questions. And at some point you open up to a public hearing, and then you close that and make a ruling. It's not terribly much more complicated than a regular application, other than you have an intervener who now has the right to present in a slightly more formal fashion than the public at a public hearing, where you're usually limited to 3 minutes. An intervener typically is not limited to the 3 minutes, although limited to the usual period of time that someone presents. I mean, we can't just go on for days. We have no intention of doing so.
Well, thank you very much, and I think that is the assessment that the board would have. The order that you, and again, your burden of proof, you made that clear to us. And I would like to, if you could please, with you to begin your presentation, knowing that if you would just indicate for our record what documents you're referring to. This came in over the course of probably 2 weeks. I know there is I think it's called a petition, a verified petition. Yeah, so if you can just speak to those so we just have them on the record initially.
Okay. So you should have in your records a November 2023 verified petition to intervene by Mr. Robert Fuchs. That's F-U-C-H-S. He's my client. He is the intervener. I'm his representative. It has my signature on it as his legal representative, and it's been verified under oath on the last page, sworn as an affidavit. The application by statute is required to allege unreasonable impact to natural resources. It can't just track the language of the statute. There's a case that requires there to be factual specificity, and we've done that by specifying that the stormwater management system as proposed poses a significant risk to groundwater, and the design of the stormwater management system is not in compliance with the guidance of the 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual put out by DEP. And there's a little more specificity in there, but that specificity of allegation is sufficient to get us intervention status, which is what your town council has advised you. And so you'll see that document. I don't have if you've got an exhibit number on that.
We have it, and so the people out in the public who've not seen it, most of us up here have access to iPads or phones. Some later points that we were checking our emails, that's not accurate. We don't have as much paper as we used to, so we might be looking at things. So I suggest that we have those materials. Was there anything else that you presented other than the verified petition to the city planner or the director of planning and land use?
I don't believe your office has the report of my client's engineer, which is Trinkus Engineering, Steve Trinkus, who is with me here tonight, who will present on my behalf, or my client's behalf. I have his report, which he'll be summarizing in his comments. He won't be reading it to you, of course.
Yep.
But I have 7 copies of that, and I also have his curriculum vitae, which is basically his resume, his work history, so you can see his expertise.
Mr. Sadi, if I may ask through you, the intervener, counsel,
You may.
you have not provided us up to today with the report of your engineer.
I have not. I was going to do it at the last meeting, but we got postponed.
Well, how come you've had a long time since Attorney Hollister and his client were here? What took so long?
I presented it. Mr. Attorney Hollister has a copy of the report.
Yeah, but we're the ones making a decision, not Attorney Hollister. How come we don't have it?
I was waiting until I had an opportunity to present at the public hearing. We had filed an intervention. We didn't know if we were accepted as an intervener, and last meeting I would have given it to the commission at that time. but I'll be presenting it this evening. But you'll also have the benefit of Mr. Trinkus, who wrote the report, to summarize it for you. What we're doing is we're just submitting into the record so that you have the sort of the written version. But if I may, I'd like to reach.
Let's go to the next step. Could you just identify the document that you have and the date of it and how many pages it is, please?
Yes, sir. It is Trinkus Engineering's report dated November 6th, 2023. It is 4 pages. And his CV is a separate document, and it is actually 25 pages. He's actually got quite an extensive work history. So those 2 documents I'd also like to submit.
Sorry.
Should I bring them over to?
Definitely 1 copy of each to the city planner, and as many copies you have out to the members of the board so we can look at them, because I don't think it's been any of our packets.
And that, Mr. Chairman, is the sum total of our documents for your consumption.
And is it your, as I listen to you, is it your preference to present testimony from the writer of the report?
I think that would be helpful because it'll one, give you a summary and the real-time opportunity to ask him questions if you have any. And I'd like to give you a brief introduction of it so I can give you sort of the framework of what we'll be operating in. I promise I'll be brief, especially because I have my engineer present this evening. So as I indicated, my client is actually Robert Fuchs and his wife, who reside at 17 Shell Avenue, which is near the subject property. I myself, as I said, I'm an attorney from New Haven, and I practice environmental land use, and I have an office at 51 Elm Street. So the intervention basically alleges that the natural resources that are being impacted are groundwater and the Long Island Sound, which is coastal waters. And the unreasonable nature of the activity is that the impacts from the stormwater system's design are avoidable by reducing the density and the intensity. Basically, they're overbuilding the site. They're over-intensifying it. They have a feasible alternative, which is they're almost doubling the number of units at the site. They could reduce the number of units and the size of the structure, and thereby reduce some of the impacts. But my client hired a professional engineer, Stephen Trinkus, and he's raised both environmental and non-environmental issues. But and just to be clear, because we have a public hearing, he's also going to be speaking as a member of the public, to present, or on behalf of my client, to present some things that involve fire safety and traffic. So I've submitted the report, and just to give you sort of a brief heads up on where it's going, snow storage and snow management are important issues that he's raised. The fact that the stormwater system itself is discharging in a very small area using hydrodynamic separators that are in series. And what that means is these units are 1, 2, 3 in a row. And the basic theory here, and Mr. Trinkus will explain it, but as the water that's discharged into them goes through, it becomes cleaner, and the easy removal of contaminants has already occurred. So the next unit has to work harder, but it can't. It works the same as every other unit. They're all the same. And so the removal efficiency rates go down because they're working on the marginal removal as it goes through. And yet, whenever these things are used in series, the designers tend to say, well, it's the same removal rate all the way through. And they add them instead of using what is really an engineering calculation of the reduction as it goes through. And so the reduction in nutrient removal and suspended solids removal actually is overstated in the application. I'd like to make another comment about the traffic study. The traffic study was done in the summer. Excuse me, it was done in the fall, not in the summer when the traffic tends to be higher.
Council, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think you indicated that the traffic study was not part of the intervention, so
I'll keep it separate.
thank you.
So anyway, a pollutant loading analysis really does need to be conducted. The applicant bears the burden of proving that their application will not have adverse effects to the public welfare and safety, which is your purview. And in order to meet that burden of proving that they should be deserving of the application, of the permit, they really need to do that pollutant loading analysis and then show how they're going to handle that load, as opposed to just saying, hey, we put in these systems that'll handle these volumes.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point on that. This is an 830G application. Isn't the burden of proof more relaxed under 830G?
The burden is relaxed for, basically they are exempt from the normal restrictions of zoning, but they still have to prove that they're not exempt from public health and safety concerns. So, for instance, they have to still meet the building code, they have to meet the fire code, and they still have to prove that they're not going to cause environmental harm. But they, in terms of coverage and in terms of setbacks, they're exempt from those. So yes, they have special rules that apply to them, and on appeals they have beneficial rules as well.
Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, sir. So just to finish up, Mr. Trinkus has pointed out in 24 numbered paragraphs what his concerns are. I think he will highlight them now, and I'll ask him, should he present from here or at the podium?
Anybody that's speaking has to be at the podium. And if you would give us your name, please, your business address, we'd appreciate that.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. Stephen Trinkus, I'm a licensed professional engineer with an office at 114 Hunters Ridge Road, Southbury, Connecticut, 06488. I've been a licensed PE since 1988 and practice on a sole proprietor since 1990, which is a fairly long time. My expertise is really low-impact development. I do a lot of land development projects. The focus of low-impact development, or LID as it's commonly known, is runoff volumes and water quality of runoff. Conventional stormwater management deals with peak rate attenuation and doesn't really address water quality. So the focus of my comments is on the water quality impacts. In the applicant's documentation, they note an infiltration rate of 78 inches per hour, which is extremely fast. If you convert that to feet per day, it's about 156 feet per day. So a drop of water on this site moving down towards the sound is going to go 156 feet in 24 hours. That's pretty quick. No treatment is provided in the sand. The water is simply moving too fast through it. The applicant's plan has the roof drains and a catch basin with what they call a HydroWorks in-unit hydrodynamic separator. Hydrodynamic separators have been around since the early to mid-90s. When they first came out, everybody thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread to treat water quality very quickly. Unfortunately, in the intervening years, as more testing was done on these systems, they were found not to be very efficient in removing total suspended solids primarily. There's two great references. The New Hampshire Stormwater Center at Durham, New Hampshire, associated with the university there, has been monitoring a 9-acre commuter parking lot that goes to multiple different treatment systems that they evaluate. They started this in '04 and they continue to today. What they found was hydrodynamic separators can be in two configurations. They can be in what they call online, where all the water goes into it, goes through it, and goes out, or offline, where simply the rate of runoff associated with 1 inch of rain, the water quality storm, goes to the separator. All the larger events bypass the separator. If the separator is in an offline configuration, the total suspended solid removal is 75%, based on real-world monitoring data. If it's in an online configuration, that removal efficiency drops down to 28%. That's a substantial drop from the represented 80+ by the manufacturer. Additionally, the American Society of Civil Engineers has been doing what they call a BMP database. It was last updated in 2020. This is, again, based on real-world monitoring data across the U.S., so from California to Connecticut to Florida. App owners can submit real-world monitoring data, and they compile it in this database. They don't differentiate between online or offline separators, but as an average, it's 38%. So if the average is 38, obviously one of those numbers is less than 38%. So in either case, the claimed removal rates of over 80% in this case simply aren't supported by documentation. Furthermore, based on the applicant's own data that they submitted in their stormwater report, they cite a analysis by Alden Labs, who I'm familiar with. I've seen the principal speak at conferences in the past, from 2018, that it was a 61% removal. New Jersey has what they call the New Jersey NJCAT system, which is, again, lab-based monitoring of these practices, and they only come up with 50.1%. So you're nowhere near 80%, which is the DEP goal. Now, the separators, back when the Stormwater Quality Manual was developed in 2004, there was an assumption made by DEP and other states, quite honestly, that if you trap sediment, you trapped all other pollutants along with it, such as nutrients, phosphorus, nitrogen, metals, hydrocarbons, and therefore, if you trap sediment, you got everything else. Well, in the intervening years since the early 2000s, what has been found is that's not the case. The various pollutants, nutrients, and metals, hydrocarbons come in both particulate form and soluble form, so the removal efficiencies don't carry through. If you look at the data in my letter from New Hampshire as an example, where the hydrocarbon loads are reduced by 42% and metals by 26%. So that kind of shoots the whole argument that you trap sediment, everything else goes along with it. In this particular case, the primary pollutant of concern is, well, there's three. There's metals, hydrocarbons, and nitrogen. Nitrogen is a limiting factor in saltwater systems. It's well documented by Save the Sound and other environmental groups of increased nitrogen loads impacting salt marshes, which kills the tidal grasses, and the marshes become more prone to erosion because the grasses are disappearing because of nitrogen. In this particular case, the runoff will go into the sand and migrate following the topographic gradient down to Long Island Sound with no treatment of the nitrogen. It's simply going to run right through it and ultimately get into Long Island Sound. And while it may not affect tidal grasses at the edge of the sound here, it does go into the sound and will impact, water somewhere along the line. Metals and hydrocarbons also will move quickly through it. They can be very toxic at low concentrations. We basically have a sea of parking here, whether it's under the building or it's a surface parking, but as the applicant said in their response to my letter, the parking garage underneath the building is going to be pitched out to the parking lot. So basically, if you eliminate the building, you pretty much have a big parking lot on this site with cars, which are going to have little drips of oil. You're going to have the brake dust, which is primarily zinc. If we all wash our rims, you'll notice they're pretty much black. That's zinc from your brake pads. And this will go into the system through this online separator into the underground galleries with little to no treatment whatsoever. And now you're basically putting pollutants into the groundwater, which will cause, over time, adverse environmental impacts by changing the water quality. In the applicant's response, they basically let HydroWorks, take me to the woodshed, so to speak. I would take exception to a lot of that. HydroWorks is saying, oh, the UNH data is no good, the BMP data is no good. Basically, listen to us. We're the manufacturer. Well, I got news for the manufacturer. I don't trust your data for the simple reason that it's done in the lab. Lab testing generally uses uniform silicas. It's a manufactured stormwater. It's not necessarily anything based on reality. Both the ASC database and the UNH system is based on a real-world situation. The parking lot at UNH, as an example, and I've been to the center multiple times, is a 9-acre commuter lot. There's bus traffic, there's student parking. It all drains to one point where they have their treatment facility. So this is the real-world scenario, and this is the results over the monitoring. So HydroWorks is trying to sell the applicant a product. Hydrodynamic separators are a pretty expensive line item. Obviously, they like to make the sale, but you cannot dismiss independent monitoring data from the real world. That's where the rubber meets the road, and in this case, that data trumps the applicant's conclusion that this is not going to pollute the groundwater. The pollutant loading analysis, and the applicant also in their response says, well, if you're meeting the water quality volume and the retention volume here because you're in a coastal environment, you don't have to do the pollutant load. It's assumed that pollutant load will be reduced. In engineering, you can't make assumptions like that. The pollutant loading analysis actually is part of the draft 2024 stormwater manual. There is a provision in there to require people to do one. So you need to do one because you need to be able to show your commission or other commissions that you will reduce these pollutant loads. In this case, I will tell you, you're going to remove 28, 30% of total suspended solids, maybe 40% of the metals, excuse me, 26% of the metals, and hydrocarbon, maybe 42%. You're not doing anything for nutrients. The nutrients are going to be in the groundwater and heading towards Long Island Sound because this site is higher than the Sound. And there will be environmental impacts from these pollutants over time. Water quality impacts are not something that happen, today to tomorrow. They happen today to 2 years down the road. And that's what we're finding, and that's why there's more of an emphasis on addressing water quality because the stormwater impacts build up over time. I'll use freshwater lakes as an example because phosphorus is a limiting factor in them. By the time you have algae or invasive vegetation, your phosphorus loads are through the roof, and to correct them then isn't very easy to do. It sneaks up on you, and then one day your lake isn't usable. And that's some of the issues that we're also seeing with the tidal environments because of increased nitrogen loads from runoff. That's the primary environmental impact. I know Attorney Holster shared November 15th response from Codispoti to my letter, but the focus really on the environmental side is the water quality, and that's the short version of it. I'm not going to go through the rest of my comments. I had other engineering comments they responded to, but that's the big one, is the water quality aspects.
Thank you very much. Are any questions by the members of the board? Mr. Zaharides, I'll look to my right this time. Mr. Hurst, thank you.
Mr. Trinkus, what is, and it could be in your report, I'm sorry, there's some of that I don't understand, but what is the reason why is it the size of the property? Do you think there's a certain size that would be not adverse to what you're explaining to everybody here? Do you understand what my question is?
Yeah, I understand. I don't have a particular size. The bottom line is there are other systems that could address these issues that have to be considered. Whether you build it or not isn't for me to say. That's quite honestly your job. But I review these plans looking at, does the system work? Will it protect the environment? And the short answer here is no, it doesn't. So there needs to be a reevaluation to address the water quality impacts on the site, especially when you have sands that are highly, highly permeable.
So there are other systems that would work that you'd be comfortable with?
If they're designed properly, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Hurst, thank you.
Currently on the property, there are units for living. Is that your understanding?
Yes, there is.
All right. What is the current system used to prevent runoff water from entering the Sound, if anything?
If you could go to the existing conditions map, if I could ask. First off, you have, maybe pull it down so we see the house and driveway area. In this case, you have a building with a gravel driveway, and you have a bunch of green space or perhaps even bare ground between the building and the tidal wall there. So the runoff has an opportunity to go across that ground. If it's vegetated, nutrients will be taken up by the grass. So that addresses one of those concerns. Also, the gravel parking lot isn't going to concentrate the runoff as much as a paved parking lot is. So you basically have less impervious cover, and therefore you would have less impacts, even though there is no treatment system here. But if you contrast this plan with the applicant's plan, basically everything above the seawall is going to be impervious cover. In this case, it's not.
Let's do that again in English, okay?
Okay, all right.
So right now, today is November 21, 2023. Right now, there's a gravel driveway.
Yes,
All
according,
right.
yes.
So, wait, I got to do it my way. There's a gravel driveway, and you're saying that oils, nutrients, carbons, whatever you have, it is being absorbed into the gravel driveway rather than running off into the sound?
Well, I don't know how many cars are going to be parking, how many cars are parking on it.
We're not talking gonna, we're talking now. I'm not talking
Yeah,
about 2 years in the future, now.
No, I'm saying right now, I don't know how many cars are associated with the existing residential use here. It's likely it's only a few cars versus the current proposal. If there's any oil drips, and I'm not saying this is the ideal situation, but you have a gravel that may be more compacted than the sand underneath it, so any pollutants, the metals and hydrocarbons that come off your car may get caught in the gravel layer. Most gravel driveways are processed stone, which is crushed stone and stone dust, and it's compacted together. It's not impermeable, but it's not very permeable. So, but those compounds can stick to that material. And the roof runoff is likely just gutters, if there is gutters going out onto the ground, and they will flow across that open area between the structure and the seawall and Long Island Sound, given the opportunity to infiltrate or be taken up by the nutrients, be taken up by vegetation within that undeveloped area.
So what you're saying is that a paved driveway is more dangerous to a Long Island Sound than a gravel driveway?
Yes.
Any other questions? Mr. Mortimer?
Yeah, just a follow-up. So a solution to this would be just keep a gravel driveway?
Well, if you were going to keep this structure and wanted to improve the water quality, you could do, what's called a rain garden or bioretention system, which is a depressed landscaped area for the roof runoff to go into. That would filter the runoff, remove many of the pollutants, and put the water back into the ground. Similarly, for the gravel driveway, you could do a vegetated filter strip on the bottom side of the driveway looking at the screen, where runoff would come across the driveway through a vegetated area and filter through the grass and infiltrate. So you could address the runoff here. But when the whole site's paved over, you don't have those available options.
Okay, thank you.
John, you all done? Mr. Hirsch?
Yes, sir. Would floor drains also be part of a proper system, in your opinion, for remediating issues in terms of having rainwater or water flowing into Long Island Sound?
Floor drains in the parking garage?
Sure.
Yeah. From other projects, and this was an underground parking garage, but DEP has a memo that actually goes back to 1988 where underground parking garages, and I need to specify that, you have to have floor drains, they have to go to a hydrodynamic separator, and they have to go to the sanitary sewer system. I know even on residential homes, if you were to put a drain in your garage, you could not discharge that to a drainage system. You'd have to discharge it to some other treatment system. So in this case, as this is quote-unquote under building parking, that doesn't fall under the underground parking garage criteria where it has to go to the sanitary sewer, but that runoff will drain out of the building onto the pavement. It still needs to be treated by an appropriate system to, again, remove any hydrocarbons or metals because there is parking under the building.
So just to follow up, they ran the runoff into a simple rain garden. That wouldn't be enough to filter the contaminants. You're saying they need additional
A properly
systems.
designed rain garden, I prefer the term bioretention because that's the technical term for it, but a properly designed, sized one, because of the underlying sand, I would use a media that is less sand than we typically use because the underlying sand is so permeable. You'd want to have more residence time within it to provide the filtering and the trapping of the nutrients, but that could be a potential solution.
Okay, and there's none of that in the present plans, is your point. I'm taking it. There's no rain garden.
There's no nothing now. I mean, many projects, there's absolutely no. Stormwater management, since I really got into doing design work in the early 80s, there's only until the past 4 or 5 years have applicants and commissions really been focused on water quality. Up until that point, there was quite honestly, it was all peak rate attenuation, and that's the only stormwater criteria that was used. So there's many projects with absolutely no treatment, but we need to draw lines in the sand and do better.
Thank you.
Any other members? So I have a number of questions. Can you tell us when you sought through permission through council to visit this site to do any testing?
I did not discuss anything with Attorney Hollister or visit the site. The applicant, according to the plans, had done testing, but the results were not on the plans or in the report. They've now provided them in the response to me.
Okay, and then you talked about UNH in the parking lot. I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is. There's thousands of cars there as opposed to, you don't even know the number of cars here. Could you just explain what the relevance of that is?
The relevancy of the UNH facility, and maybe if I can digress and maybe just explain it, this 9-acre parking lot for commuting students at the University of New Hampshire all drains to a single discharge point. And back in 2004, UNH got, I believe, grants out of EPA to, perform research, and they designed a system that takes the water from that catch basin and dispersed it equally in volume and flow rate to 9 different treatment practices that they would change out over time. They had a wet pond, they had a bioretention cell, they had a sand filter, they had different types of hydrodynamic separators, they had a subsurface gravel wetlands. And the beauty of their system is that the water quality and the flow rates were all equalized to all of these systems, so they could compare a wet pond to a hydrodynamic separator to something else because the flow and the pollutant load were even to all of them. And they monitored the flow before it went through the practice, they monitored the flow after the practice. All the systems were aligned so that they could, see the removal efficiencies of pollutants within them. And it's a 9-acre commuter lot. I'm not saying you've got 9 acres of cars here, but that's pretty much the primary use. And what it was designed to show is how the various treatment systems functioned and how they did remove pollutants in a real-world situation. Prior to that, there wasn't any other facility like that. Villanova University has several LID practices on their campus where Rob Traver is a professor of stormwater down there.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I think you're getting away from the answer to the question.
I'm getting away. The bottom line is that UNH is monitoring a real situation, a real-world parking lot. And it doesn't matter the size, but it matters that they're testing all these different systems to see how well they work. And they have found that online separators don't work as well as the manufacturers claim they work.
Okay, and I appreciate that because most of us, when you use the term UNH, would think the University of New Haven, which would be the next town over.
Yeah, we
But
have
that's
a little
fine.
problem with that.
So your report is, I don't have it right in front of me, November 6th, I believe.
Correct.
Approximately. Prior to your issuing the report, did you examine the city engineer's report?
Yes,
that they did?
I looked at all the staff comments on this application.
Did you, I don't see anything in your report concerning the staff comments, which I'm talking about Mr. Pidlowski, the city engineer's report.
I don't have a copy of it with me. I did review it, however. I believe I have more expertise on the water quality side than your city engineer has, and that's why I looked at different aspects of the plans. I looked at the water quality functionality of the design, but I did review his comments.
Now, you also talked about DEEP, which is Department of Environmental Protection, and the reports. Which reports from DEEP did you review prior to presenting your report to us?
Well, currently, it's the 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual, which is still in effect until the new one is supposedly going to be adopted in March of ¡24, I believe.
Okay.
That's a document.
And then there's a response by Caraspoti and Associates that came out, I think, this week. But the point is that went point by point. The number 24, which is on page 7 of the Caraspoti response, there's a discussion there about infiltration rates. And you had indicated in your report that the infiltration rates between 2 inches an hour and 8.3 inches an hour. Could you just explain that, please, for the infiltration rates that you say should be proposed? Is that your 2 inch to 8.3 inches? Is that from your report?
No, that was a recommendation from either your town engineer with a discussion with the applicant, Caraspoti, to address the fact that the underlying sand was 78 inches per hour, which was obviously exceedingly fast. So the idea is to put a 2-foot layer of sandy material underneath the galleries that has an infiltration rate between 2 and 8.3 inches per hour. The current DEP manual recommends, it does not say a shall, it's a should. It says the natural infiltration rate should not exceed 8.3 inches per hour. However, they also note that infiltration galleries, such as being proposed here, should be in a Class A or B soil. Well, a Class A soil is a sand and gravel soil, and based on my self-testing sand and gravel soils, in many cases we find the infiltration rate higher than 8.3 inches. The 8.3 inches is what's called a Rawls number, R-A-W-L-S. This is an average maximum infiltration rate for sand and gravel soils throughout the country. So it's not specific to the Northeast. It's really any place you have sand and gravel soils, that's the recommended maximum number, and I think that's why that's in the DEP manual. When you have excessively well-drained soils that you have here, you need to have a higher level of treatment before you put the water into that material, because the water is just simply going to run through it so fast. There's no treatment being provided. It's just rushing through it.
And in reference to, again, page 7 of the Caraspoti response, it was indicated in their response that the 2-inch or 2-foot of modified soil beneath the galleries discussed at length with John Gauscher, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and Greg Podlusky, the city engineer, in a conference call, and they appeared to indicate from that document, at least the portion of the response, that there was not a really very large environmental concern, because DEEP was involved in it, not just the city engineer, but DEEP was not involved. DEEP was involved. They didn't find a large environmental concern.
Well, with all due respect to DEEP, I disagree with that assessment. Simply because you have excessively well-drained soils here that are not providing any treatment. Therefore, you have to have a higher level of treatment before you put the water back into the ground.
Are there any other questions from the members of the board based on my questions? So it seems to me, again, this is groundbreaking for all of us, thank you, that we have no further questions. You may go where you want to.
Yep, thank you.
Do you have anybody else to present?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Do you have any additional comments before I hear from Attorney Hollister? Or we hear from Attorney Hollister?
No, I don't. That's our presentation.
Okay, so at this point, just before Attorney Hollister gets up, does the board have questions for the applicant's attorney? None. Okay, I do have some.
Maybe after I hear from Attorney Hollister.
Okay, that's fine, but I have some questions for you, counsel. The claim that you have, and I'm trying to wrap my hand around, I think you made your earlier comments, that the overbuilding and the number of units, but you didn't tell us what would be the maximum number you, on behalf of your client, would think. So they're talking about going from, I think, 9 to 20, but the land side, the size of the building isn't much different. parking lot might change, but what's the number that you think is appropriate for the number of units in that building, knowing that, I think it's 9, is there already?
Our contention is not necessarily based on the number of units, but the amount of impervious cover, because it's limiting their ability to control their stormwater. They probably could, if they reduced the units, make a smaller, reconfigure the building to be smaller, they could put in more green space, more different treatment systems, as Mr. Trinkus pointed out. So there's other ways to configure the property. I mean, you're rebuilding here. You don't have to use the same footprint. You don't have to increase the impervious surface.
Thank you. And the last question I have for you is, we have several lawyers on the board here, as you may know, and you provided case law in your petition, and I'm just asking you if you have any case law from the state of Connecticut with the concern for the environment, which you have a right to be an intervener, however, in its effect with the status of an 830G application.
I don't think the case law differs for 830G applications because they're not exempt from environmental law. They're exempt from zoning law.
But do you have any cases that indicate this particular issue that we're faced with today? Any legal precedent that you have, other than what you've cited to us in your petition?
Nothing other than what I've cited. What I've cited is the basic black letter for environmental interventions, but there's nothing specifically for 830G.
Thank you. Does any other members, Attorney, Mr. Hirsch?
Yeah, counsel, I think, Attorney Ainsworth, I think the case law, I can give you the case. It's Brenmore Properties versus Planning and Zoning Commission of Lisbon, 162 Conap 678. I think Attorney Hollister knows that case very well. The case law talks about health and safety. Is environmental under the umbrella of health and safety, as contemplated by our case law?
Yes. I mean, the planning and zoning's basic enabling legislation under 8-3 gives you the authority over a very broad-based suite of things to look at. Like, for example, the Wetlands Commission can only deal with wetlands, inland wetlands and watercourses. You guys have general public health, safety, and welfare. That is a very broad-based enabling legislation that gives you the authority to promulgate regulations that govern everything from the health of Long Island Sound to public health in the air, really everything. And so it's there.
Do you have any case law or statutory case law, or statutory authority for that proposition, that environmental falls within that health and safety rubric as contemplated by Connecticut General Statute 8-30G?
Not as I sit here, but I could do some research on that.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Sadik. I am neither an attorney nor a engineer, but it seems to me that if we're looking at the environmental impact of the runoff, if we looked at different systems of water filtration, that might not even take into account the number of apartments. That might be the one solution here.
We're not taking the position that this site can't be developed, and we're not taking the position that even this project couldn't be accommodated if it were designed properly. So to your point, yes, there are ways that these problems could be solved, I think. I mean, we haven't designed it for them, but I do believe that's the case.
Is there any way that the problem could be solved with 20 units of housing, affordable housing in that area?
I'm going to say maybe, because I don't know the answer to that. But I suspect what Mr. Trinkus has pointed out could be resolved at least in part, which would allow greater than what's there to happen. But I can't be specific because I don't think it's our burden to redesign the project so that it does work. I think we're here to point out why what's being presented isn't sufficient.
Mr. Sadi?
Yes, Mr. Zarides.
I am also neither an attorney, and I don't know a whole lot about case law either, but I don't think the board here needs to know about case law, and I would agree that the environment, in my opinion, falls under health, safety, and welfare.
Okay, so at this point, Attorney Hollister, you can come up, and I think we're in a position where you are now rebutting the application or the petition, the verified petition of the intervener. Is that your assessment of it?
Yeah, yes, that's correct.
Well, thank you very much, and you can go ahead, please.
Okay. Let me first ask, do the board members have a copy of the CODIS Bodie response? I know you had it, you referred to it, Mr. Chair. I have hard copies right here if you would like me to distribute them.
It came through us, but if the members of the board wish to have it in front of them, that's fine also, but thank you.
We have a two-part response to Attorney Ainsworth and Mr. Trinkus. I have some sort of general comments, and then I'm going to have Mr. Wee from CODIS Bodie hit at least the high points of his letter. In response to the question that came up earlier, why so late? I think that's an important point. This application was filed with Mr. Sulkus on July 14th. We were here to hear about the application, the public comment on October 3rd. The petition came in on November 1st, and Mr. Trinkus's report came on November 6th. And I think it's very interesting and very telling that the petition was filed before the report was even done. That should tell you something about the sequence and the quality of the presentation. As has been mentioned, it's very important. The city engineer, the Department of Environmental Protection, Coastal Resources section, all looked at the stormwater and water quality treatment, had no concerns. You have in the file, I believe Mr. Sulkus will verify this, a letter from the Milford Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Association. Agency. They reviewed the application and concluded we do not even need a regulated activities permit. You are not, of course, the wetlands agency, and one of the, I'm not going to get into case law discussion unless Mr. Hirsch would like me to, but one of the seminal cases in Connecticut is that zoning commissions, when you receive an environmental petition, you don't become a mini environmental protection agency. The petition that Attorney Ainsworth has filed does not change your jurisdiction, and to address directly Mr. Hirsch's question, the case of Quarry Knoll versus Planning and Zoning Commission, 256 Connecticut 674, 2001, at pages 711 to 719, said that an environmental intervention petition does not change the standard for an 830G application. So Mr. Ainsworth and Mr. Trinkus needed to come and show not just that there will be pollution somewhere, but that there will be a substantial public health and safety interest created by this application. Now, the flip side of that comment is the word pollution. Remember, pollution strictly defined means any change, no matter how small, in the quality of water or whatever the resource is. So the example I always use is if we put a drop of arsenic in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, we have polluted that swimming pool. Are we concerned about that? No, because it's such a tiny little, which is why the real important thing here is quantification, calculation, and Mr. Trinkus has a wonderful gig following my development clients around the state of Connecticut and criticizing their stormwater management plans, but part of his pattern is he always talks about an increase. Does he ever quantify the increase? Does he ever do the calculations? No. He says there's going to be a water quality impact. Okay, a generic impact maybe, but where, when, how, what's the quantity, and what's the impact? He didn't say that here because he didn't do the work to back that up. Very telling that you asked him all about, well, what density or what reduction. They can't answer that. Well, if they were doing their environmental intervention homework, they would be able to answer that question. So it's not enough to just say you should do it differently. You have to, if you're going to make your case on environmental intervention, you have to say you should put this equipment in this location, and the difference would be X, Y, or Z. That would be a comparison of the existing condition with the proposed condition, and that would then maybe we have something to talk about. But none of what Mr. Trinkus said has that information. Please note also that the DEP Stormwater Manual is not a regulation. You do not comply or not comply with it. It is a design procedure. So anyway, those are my sort of high-level comments, but let me ask Mr. Weiwei to expand on his letter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Hollister. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. My name is Robert Weiwei. I'm a licensed professional engineer and principal with the firm of Codispoti & Associates. And I was responsible for the design of the stormwater management plan that's presently before the commission tonight.
Can we get an address for the company, please?
Excuse me?
Address for the company, please.
263 Boston Post Road, Orange, Connecticut.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We did receive the letter from Mr. Trinkus on November 6th of 23. We did have an opportunity to review the comments, and we did provide our response letter, which has been submitted to the commission. I will not go down point by point on that, given the hour that we're at. But I think some of the important points, and Mr. Trinkus did hit on them also. When we look at the existing conditions map for the property, this is not a bare, pristine piece of property. It's a piece of property that has a 9-unit apartment building on it, has a gravel parking area, it has landscaped area, and it is a developed site. So this is considered a redevelopment project in the context of the deep water quality manual. So we are going to be changing the site. We are going to be changing some of the runoff characteristics and the land use covers on the site. So what was pointed out, what's out there today, is we do have the gravel surface that is going to be replaced with a paved surface, and that is primarily to be able to provide structural support in consultation with your fire marshal. One of his stipulations was that we provide an adequate surface that would support basically the fire vehicles for being able to enter onto that. So in part, that asphalt system provides that mechanism for the fire safety and protection of the property and the development. So with that being said, there was a lot of discussion in Mr. Trinkus's comments with regards to stormwater pollutants and requesting of us to provide detailed calculations. And our response back to that is, basically we are designing off of the City of Milford engineering guidelines, as well as DEEP's 2004 and now their upcoming updated manual, which will become effective next year. So those are basically our two guidance documents that we use to formulate the stormwater management plan for the project. And when you take a look at the new manual that's coming out, or the updated manual, they make reference to what's referred to as the required retention volume for the stormwater. And basically, to put that in a simple context, under today's standards, it basically means that you're going to treat the first inch of runoff that comes off of the site. Under the new manual, that is being raised to 1.3 inches of runoff that's going to come off the site. But what's important in their manual, and they talk about that when you get into providing whatever treatment practices you're going to do, and in our particular case, we have the hydrodynamic separator as well as the infiltration galleries. So when we provide those types of features and elements, and we are able to meet the requirements of the storage volume, which we have in the gallery system, the DEEP basically takes the position that once you've met that requirement of the retention volume, that detailed calculations are not provided or not required as part of your application process or anything with the design, because it becomes somewhat redundant, because a lot of this is baked into how they come up with their treatment practices and what they require for that retention volume calculation. Now, Mr. Trinkus also made reference to that in the new manual, that they do have provisions in there for doing these detailed calculations, or not detailed calculations, but going through the treatment train and everything else to verify that you're providing the pollutant renovation. And that is in fact true, but you have to take it in the context. In the context that it needs to be taken is that you need to go through that exercise when you cannot provide the retention volume. And in this case, we have provided the retention volume with the design plans, and therefore, doing those detailed calculations is not warranted nor required under DEEP's current manual and the soon-to-be updated manual. So I think that's a very important point to note. I'll just hit also on the fact that Mr. Trinkus made the comment that he is more knowledgeable than your city engineer, Mr. Podleski. I would be taken aback by that a little bit. And when you take a look at the stormwater quality manuals, both the present 2004 as well as the updated manuals, Mr. John Goucher, which is the person that reviewed this particular project, was part and parcel to putting that 2004 manual together. He was on the steering committee that put that document together. For the updated manual, both Mr. Goucher as well as Mr. Podleski, your city engineer, were also part and parcel of putting the updated manual together too. So to come out and say Mr. Podleski does not have the level of expertise in water quality, I would strongly disagree with that, wholeheartedly. So just to expand upon Attorney Hollister's point of view, that when we get into, if we're taking a look at the pollution and saying that we have that Olympic-sized pool and we put 1 drop of arsenic into that pool and we're saying that it's now polluted, okay? There is no stormwater management treatment practice out there, regardless of what Mr. Trink has come up with the lid and everything else. Anytime you're taking the stormwater, there is going to be pollution that's introduced into the environment. So it comes down to the simple point of what level of treatment do we provide for it in accordance with DEEP's water quality manual. And if we provide that, then from DEEP's position is that is sufficient enough to protect the environment. So if you take Mr. Trinkus's point of view, or if we take a look at and saying that 1 drop of arsenic is polluting the environment, then think about what you're saying for any application that comes before this commission in the future. You're saying that no project could ever be developed. When you're taking a raw piece of land or a piece of land that's already developed, there is going to be pollution that gets introduced into the environment. It's just a simple matter of fact. So what we do is we try to mitigate those pollutants to the best that we can, and here we go back to the DEEP's water quality manual, and that's what we're providing. And the features that we've included or incorporated into our plan, we feel are in harmony with DEEP's water quality manual. John Goucher from DEEP has reviewed it. He has not come back with any negative comments, along with Mr. Podleski. So the professionals and the reviewing agencies all seem to be in agreement that the measures that we've incorporated with this proposed plan meets the intent of the 2004 water quality manual as well as what's included in the updated manual. And again, the interveners have not submitted any evidence other than conjecture that the proposed development will cause an unreasonable pollution to the natural resources in proximity to the site, including the groundwater and coastal. It's our opinion that the proposed stormwater management plan has been designed in accordance with sound engineering principles and has been reviewed by both DEEP as well as your city engineer, and they have found that the proposed plans are in harmony with those requirements. As such, it's our opinion that there will not be any significant impact from the proposed development. And with that, if there's any questions from the commission, I will certainly try to answer.
Start with Mr. Anderson first, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Weiwei, wondered if your storm management system design takes into account average conditions. Milford has the longest, as you know, longest coastline in Connecticut. So many of our properties are direct waterfront. We are prone to dealing with flash floods, and we've been the subject of a couple of tropical storms in the last 12 years. So I'm wondering, do you take into account average conditions or the worst case scenario?
I'm not sure in what context you're putting that. Are we talking with regards to peak rates of runoff?
Well, I'm referring to your design.
Okay, well, with regards to the peak rates of runoff, in conjunction with your City of Milford engineering guidelines, because we have direct waterfront property, there is no consideration for controlling peak rates of runoff, because the peaks will go directly to Long Island Sound, or in the case of the coastal, if it's also on the Housatonic River, or any other significant water body or stream system. The city's requirements are that peak rates of runoff do not need to be controlled. With that being said, we do still have the obligation to provide for the water quality management, which is what we've done on this particular project. So when we take a look at the lower frequency storms, and in this case the water quality storm, the runoff is being collected through the roof leaders. The roof leaders are coming down to a pipe system. That pipe system is being conveyed to the hydrodynamic separator. The parking area is being collected, and that is also being directed to the hydrodynamic separator. From there, the hydrodynamic separator, based upon the information provided to us from HydroWorks, and based on this site-specific information, their calculations are showing that there will be approximately 83% total suspended solids removal in the hydrodynamic separator. From the hydrodynamic separator, the flows will be directed to a yard drain, and the lower flows from that will flow to the underground gallery system, which provides additional treatment. So for the water quality volume, all that flow goes into the gallery system. There is nothing that is discharged via surface flow through that or through the outfall pipe that we have on the design system. That outfall pipe comes into play when the capacity of the gallery system is exceeded. And at that point, and those are typically with your high flow events, the 10, 25 year. Anything once you start getting up around the 50 and 100 year event, everything's underwater over there anyway because of the floods. So in that situation, the water is still directed to the galleries. The galleries fill up. They have no more capacity. So then the overflow does go back through the yard drain and out through the outfall pipe that we have situated in the existing wall.
Thank you for that response. Just to punch something that you had said, the galleries would have a tendency to fill with a 10-year?
With the 10-year, I don't have the numbers available to me. I believe the 10-year, there is some overflow, yes, coming out of the galleries.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Hirsch.
Yeah, Mr. Weiwei, how come there are no floor drains proposed in the garage area?
That was part, I believe that was part of the architectural design for not putting any floor drains in there.
And why not? Wouldn't that be another mitigation system to prevent overflow of water?
Well, typically with anything that's going to occur in the floor drains, the only thing that you're really going to get off of there would be the drippings during the wintertime from snowmelt. If you're pulling into the garage during a condition like even tonight where you just have the rain, there's really nothing that's going to be coming out of that garage floor, so to speak. It's really going to be the only time that you're going to have any type of, if you want to consider it to be runoff or drainage from the garage floor, would be through the drippings from any ice and snow that gets built up on the cars and underneath the fenders. So I think to answer your question, can floor drains be implemented for the project? They probably could. That's an extra step. That's an extra step that would have to get put in place for a central collection for the floor drains, and they would have to go into an oil water separator to separate out basically the particulate matter and the floatables prior to discharging into your sanitary sewer system. And if in concert, if you talk with Mr. Saley, who's your public works director, he is not a fan of connecting up these types of floor drains to the sewer system because his concern is that if there is any sediment or any particulate matter that gets into the system, it follows up his pump stations, his pumps, and just adds a lot of maintenance to his sanitary sewer system.
Yeah, well, I understand that it adds to the maintenance, but we're talking about outflows towards Long Island Sound. Which obviously there's a lot of concern about in this room, so.
Okay, well, I think just to follow up on that, any of the runoff that's going to come from the garage floor is being directed out onto the parking area. So that, it gets from the garage floor to the parking area, to the parking area, to the hydrodynamic separator. So even if you have the runoff or the drippings coming off of that garage floor, they are still being treated. They're being intercepted and treated.
Intercepted by the hydro, whatever.
By the hydrodynamic separator, right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions for Mr. Weiwei? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's what we have to present in response.
Okay, would you stay at the microphone, please, Attorney Hollister? And again, I appreciate both counsel for the applicant and for the intervener helping us on this unique matter. It appears that because this is a public hearing, that the public has a right to be heard on this specific issue. And at some point, if we close the hearing tonight, we have to make a vote on whether the intervener has met their burden of proof. Does that appear to be agreeable to both counsel? And if you can, just weigh in, please.
Yes, I mean, there's no reason why you can't hold the entire public hearing and then make your two rulings at the end if you want it to be more efficient.
Correct, and I appreciate that. Attorney Hollister, do you agree with that also?
I agree.
So I appreciate the help of both of you because now we're back to Attorney Hollister. You were before us, and I'm going to ask Mr. Sulkus to kind of remind us where we were. I know there was a traffic study issue, and if you could maybe bring us up to speed on that. Counsel for the intervener, you're welcome to sit there, and at the appropriate time, if you wish to speak, just let us know. If you have a right, you still have a right to question, I assume, but we're ready to go forward on that. But Dave, you could just fill us in where we are.
So the public hearing opened back, I believe it was in October at this point. And the board requested that a third-party peer review be conducted regarding the traffic information that the applicant submitted. So we hired John Thompson, who has provided us a report, and he's here tonight to answer any of your questions.
And again, it is your chance to go forward, but will you plan to call Mr. Thompson to discuss his report?
I think you should hear from Mr. Thompson, and
Yeah.
our traffic engineer, Mr. Ullman, may have a few rebuttal comments or to fill in, but that would be the way to go.
Thank you. We do have a one-page report that was dated November 15th of 2023. So, Mr. Thompson, if you'd come up, please. Thank you. Again, give your name, professional address also.
Good evening. My name is John Thompson, and I'm a licensed professional engineer. My office is at 79 Schoolhouse Road in Wallingford, Connecticut. As Mr. Sulkus just indicated, I was hired by the city to undertake a peer review, an independent third-party peer review of the traffic study that was prepared by Mr. Ullman for this proposed 20-unit apartment complex at 25 Shell Avenue. I just want to reiterate as I start this presentation, my assignment was to review the traffic study that was prepared, comment on the integrity and accuracy of that report, not to undertake an independent study on my own. It was just a pure peer review of information that had been compiled, and presented. While I respect Attorney Hollister and Mr. Ullman, when I received the traffic assessment for this project, it was lacking. It was in my 40 years of doing traffic studies, preparing them and reviewing them for other municipalities, it was the first time I had ever seen a traffic assessment, traffic analysis, that did not have any traffic volumes in it. It had traffic generation rates properly obtained from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, using the proper land use categories for apartment complexes of the nature that was being proposed. But it had no volumes of traffic for Shell Avenue. And for someone to say in their concluding remarks that there was no impact from this proposed development on the parking operations or the traffic on Shell Avenue in the absence of volumes, I found to be very difficult to accept. And in fact, it put me in a position where I couldn't advise your board whether this was a good project or a bad project, or whether there was any impact or no impact. Because it was the first time I'd run into this, I reached out to my professional society and I asked them, how would you review a low traffic volume generator such as this development? Mr. Ullman was aware of what I was doing because he's in the same organization and saw the same requests that I had online. I received from all over the country guidance on how to conduct these evaluations. And what they said was it should be determined beforehand what the regulatory agency wants in the way of analysis. Not at the end when you have somebody like me reviewing it and saying the information's not there. It should have been worked out at a time. The fact was, it wasn't done. I prepared my report, submitted it on October 30th, and I raised in that a number of questions. I spoke about the absence of traffic volumes. I spoke about the absence of capacity analysis to allow the city to evaluate what was the level of service of traffic operations on Shell Avenue today and what would it be in the future. Attorney Hollister in his opening letter to the city said there's no change in the level of service. Well, quite honestly, there was no basis for that. And as your peer reviewer, I compiled a list of missing information that I believed was essential to a thorough review of this project. That was submitted to the city. It was subsequently forwarded to Attorney Hollister. Actually, it was simultaneously submitted to Attorney Hollister because he claimed to be my co-sponsor for this assignment. And since he's paying, I guess, to some degree, he is the co-sponsor. He received that information, and Mr. Ellman and I spoke. There was an animosity where we both believe in doing a proper assessment of traffic impacts. Mr. Ellman subsequently took my letter, went out. He wasn't able to obtain traffic volumes for the summer. Summer's come and gone, and now we're in the fall. What he did do, he obtained information from the closest Connecticut DOT traffic count station for May, June, and expanded that, which provided a reasonable degree of statistical confidence that the numbers that he was dealing with were representative of what was happening on Shell Avenue. And I think, Mr. Hirsch, you asked a question before about storms. Does it take the average conditions? Does it take, or was I, I apologize. I was giving you credit for something in it. In any case, we all know that Shell Avenue is a street different in the summertime than it is in the winter. Clearly, the amount of traffic, the amount of pedestrian activity, the amount of bicyclists and such is 2 times, 3 times higher than it could be on an October day or a November day or, you know, a winter day. He went out, he got traffic volumes from a nearby DOT station, expanded that to what we both agree would be representative of summer traffic volumes. He performed the capacity analysis that I had requested for the closest intersection in a fashion that was consistent with traffic engineering standards, and provided a letter report on November 6th that answered my questions about traffic volumes, answered my questions about the capacity analysis, and I believe thoroughly responded to all of the concerns that I had raised. So at this point, we've gone from the request to me to review it. I've reviewed it, submitted it. The applicant has taken it upon himself to go out and get that additional information, submit it. I've subsequently reviewed that again. And tonight, at this point, I can come to the board and with a fair degree of confidence in the analyses and my evaluation of the data, I don't see this project in itself creating any adverse impact on public health, safety, or welfare. I will say that there will be some exacerbation of the existing conditions out there. No project can be built without some kind of impact. Even a rehabilitation of a single family is going to have some impacts. This project is a very low generator. We're talking about adding 4 cars during the morning peak hour and 4 cars during the evening peak hour over the existing amount of traffic that's out there today. So clearly, it's not a lot of new traffic. The analysis that was done indicates that it can be handled within the existing street system and without creating any unsafe conditions or burden on the public. So that's an overview of what was done. There's a lot of technical data that's been looked at. Unless there's specific questions, I don't want to burden the board with that.
So, anybody have any questions for Mr. Thompson? Mr. Hirsch?
Your analysis is that there will be 4 additional cars during rush hour in the morning and then 4 additional cars in rush hour in the afternoon?
My analysis is that the applicant, using the proper ITE land use categories, produced numbers that are 4 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon. I independently reviewed that, and the numbers, the land use categories are correct, and the numbers are correct.
All right, but we don't live in New York City. Okay, people have cars here. And we're talking 20 units. and I assume there's at 1.5 people per unit, that's 30 people. Everybody has their own car, that's 30 cars. So in a day, there's going to be 4 cars, extra cars from that facility, from that complex in the morning, and then 4 more in the afternoon? Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe in New York City, I don't know about Milford.
Well, no, that's, to be clear, that's during those 2 peak hours. We have 22 other hours during the day when that complex will be generating traffic. People coming and going for lunch, people that work from home, going out shopping, or whatever the case may be. I have the numbers here if you're interested, but that's only during those 2 peak hours.
But that's when people go to work, and that's when they come home from work.
That's correct.
Any other questions from members of the board? Mr. Mortimer?
In your report, you mentioned that you're working off of 1.7 spaces per dwelling unit, but in the real world, you even mentioned a husband and a wife with a 16-year-old driving age child could potentially have 3 cars. So clearly 36 total on-site parking spaces is marginal at best. And then you go on to say, well, in the summer, this is the Long Island Sound, the beach, people are going to visit. It very quickly could add up to 50, 60 cars a day. Doesn't it sound like that's accounted for in the 4 additional vehicles per rush hour?
The 4 cars that we're talking about are on weekdays. There's also tables that produce the amount of traffic during the weekends, but it's always less than what the traffic is on the street. The question of parking is an interesting one because it came to me independent as I was doing this study. Well, how are those 38 spaces going to satisfy those 20 units? As I say in here, that I try to apply logic, common sense to what I do to support the statistical analysis. And as I say, a husband, a wife, and a child. There's 3 cars. To substantiate, do we have enough? And I think Attorney Hollister said in his response that parking is somewhat exempt under 830G, and the zoning regulations don't comply or don't need to be satisfied. In order to understand whether you were still providing enough, whether they're compliant with City of Milford zoning regulations. I also looked at ITE, who has a parking generation manual, and used the parking generation there. And the 38 spaces that are being proposed are consistent, marginally consistent with what the statistics require. I think to go beyond that, and I absolutely agree with what you're saying, that the people that live there are going to invite friends and guests down to visit with them. But is that any different, quite honestly, than anybody else that lives on the street that invites friends down to visit them?
Well, I think the argument is adding the 11 apartments is maybe flooding the area with more situations like that. But I take your point. Also, and at the end of your letter, you have 6 conditions. You said that in an effort to afford the Planning and Zoning Board the necessary and appropriate technical information in order for them to render an informed decision. And I think it's really difficult to render an informed decision, not being engineers or some of us lawyers. In addition to areas in the body of the peer review report, the traffic engineer should provide the following information. You have 6 different statistical assessments here. So I would like to see that provided to the board so we could make a more informed judgment. I don't know what the rest
I believe that, in fact, Mr. Ullman did submit that on November 6th in a separate, it looks like about a 20-page document. And I also reviewed that document in developing my November 15th letter to the board, where I concluded that, as I said, there's no There's an increase in traffic, marginal increase in traffic, but it's really accommodated within the existing street system. It has the capacity without a change in the level of service. And level of service, if you haven't heard it before from some other engineer standing, it's just like the school grading system, A, B, C, D, E, F. These are operating at BC, levels of service BC, at Shell and Seaside. So it appears statistically that for the peak seasons, that the intersection has the capacity, and Shell Avenue has the capacity to handle the cars in a safe fashion. I also, during my investigation, I talked to engineering, I talked to police, I talked to fire, I talked to neighbors extensively to get a handle on really what was happening out there. And it's a difficult area, but it's not so difficult that this couldn't be constructed without an adverse impact on the street system.
So in your opinion, it could handle 20 apartments?
That's my professional opinion, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Thompson.
You're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Steve Allman. I'm a professional engineer with Alfred Benish & Company at 120 Hebron Avenue, Glastonbury, Connecticut. I responded to all of Mr. Thompson's comments. I did not perform a full study initially because when I did the analysis and started collecting data, there was first only one crash in the area. That was someone backing into a pillar. Anecdotally, I understand it was attempted theft, but I don't know that for sure. There are only 4 trips being generated during the peak hour in the morning, in the afternoon, or anytime. Now, let me walk you through where we get the 4 additional trips. The ITE trip generation studies developments all across the country, comes up with generation rates for each development. The average generation rate for a dwelling unit is 0.4 vehicles during the AM peak hour, or 0.51 vehicles during the PM peak hour. Now, what I mean by that is, first of all, we study the peak period, a 2-hour period, 7 to 9 typically, okay? And what we study in that period is the heaviest hour in that period. So the heaviest hour between 7 and 9 may be 7 to 8, 7:30 to 8:30, whatever it is, and you're gonna generate 4 new trips based on 11 units. The issue is that when people are commuting, they leave and come different times. Anecdotally, my house, when we had 3 people, myself, my wife, and my 28-year-old son, for a while before COVID, we had 0 trips during the morning peak hour and may have had 1 trip during the peak hour if I got home before 5:30, just because of the way our lives work. Yes, some other houses may generate more, but that's all averaged out in there. So that's how that comes about. And I didn't do the full study because we're talking 4 vehicles during the peak hour. So 1 vehicle every 15 minutes. And in my opinion, that's like that drop of arsenic that was brought up today in the swimming pool. It's de minimis. It is really, in my opinion, my experience, 4 vehicles on any street is not going to make a difference. However, since Mr. Thompson wanted an analysis, and I saw that there were Connecticut DOT machine counts in the area for Seaside, and I just blanked, hold on a second. The street immediately north of Shell. They had 24-hour counts on there. What I did was I took the counts on the roadway north of Shell and said, okay, I know that road is, that's Broadway, I guess, that road is much heavier traveled than Shell. I assumed all of that traffic onto Shell. I then took the count, which is on Seaside, north of Broadway, and put all of that traffic on to Seaside at Shell. And all that traffic is northbound at there. I then took those volumes and multiplied them by 3 for a worst case scenario. So if there were 100 cars, there are now 300 cars. I took our site-generated traffic, multiplied it by 3, and assigned it to that intersection. I then did a comparative capacity analysis between no build without our development and build with our development for the peak out, for a generic peak hour. There was no change in level of service. It was assumed to be a level of service C, would be a level of service C. The only change was that the average delay per vehicle during the peak hour would increase by 0.6 seconds. No impact. No one's going to notice 0.6 seconds. So that was the response to that comment. In terms of parking, I did an analysis using the ITE Parking Generation Manual, 5th edition. It contains parking generation rates similar to the ITE trip generation. And what they give you is maximum parking spaces needed during specific times. And what we found, I used both the average and the equations, both for based on number of units total or number of occupied units. This is all my letter, so I'm not going to do it. But what it came up with is that on Saturday between 11 to 7 a.m., a need of 33 parking spaces for a 20-unit apartment complex. And it varies from, well, 6 I'm going to throw out because that's no good, 24 to 33 spaces needed based on those numbers. So yes, we are providing enough for that. There is no data that I can find, no data that I did the research that talks about changes in parking at apartments or residences at different seasons, summer, winter, whatever. And the likelihood that how many people who are living there are going to have friends over in the summer on the same day at the same time. There's no way to know or judge that. Like every other house on Shell, people have to park on the street if it's available or elsewhere. So that answers that. And basically, you know, our conclusion is that based on the findings of our traffic review, it's a professional opinion of Alfred Benish Company that the new 25 Shell Avenue apartments in Milford will not impede or adversely affect traffic operations, traffic safety, nor affect public safety in the area. And I'm here for questions for you. I think I hit everything.
Thank you. Any questions by the members of the board? See, Mr. Mortimer?
Thank you, Mr. Sadik. Just one question. You mentioned Saturday. You took traffic from a Saturday rather than a weekday?
No. When I did the volume, for the capacity analysis, it was just the heaviest volume during the week. And it didn't matter what day or whatever, it was just the heaviest. The parking says that there are 2 basic times where residential developments of this nature peak out, have the heaviest demand. It's typically a weekday between 11 and 6, or a Saturday night between 11 and 7. You look at both. Excuse me. Some land uses, and even some apartments, will have a higher generation of parking during the week as opposed to the weekend. For this land use, it happens to be during that Saturday night to Sunday morning.
Okay, thank you.
Any other members of the board? I have a question for you in reference to the ongoing work with the individual that was hired on behalf of the board. Did not the police study that was done by Sergeant Kraniak indicate that there was nothing that would directly compromise public safety and recommended a favorable approval?
Correct. That is in the record, both the city engineer, fire marshal, and Sergeant Krasinski all
Kraniak.
stated that it was
So
no problem.
don't leave yet, please. This is to the intervener, and I should have done it with the earlier person. Do you have any specific questions for this individual?
Excuse me, no, I don't.
And did you have any questions for Mr. Thompson? I should have asked you that at the time.
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hollister, Attorney Hollister, you can proceed next. I'm sorry, Mr. Hirsch.
Yeah, Mr. Setti, I have a question for the intervener counsel. May I ask him a question?
If it's in reference to what we're doing right now.
It has to do with the traffic study, yeah.
Okay.
Attorney Ainsworth, do you have any evidence of a specific harm that would likely result from the proposal in terms of the traffic in this area with Shell Avenue? Or that it's unsafe? Do you have any evidence to support that?
I don't have any testimony to present to the commission.
Well, evidence can come in many forms, not just testimony. Do you have any evidence of any kind to support that the proposed manner in which this unit is being designed or constructed or proposed leads it to be unsafe to members of the general public?
And you're not referring just to traffic, are you? Or are you?
I'll do it again. I'll do it all night. I have nothing. There's no football on. There's nothing. I'll be here all night. I don't care. I'll do it again. Do you have any evidence, testimony, documentary, or any evidence to support the proposition that there would be some specific harm that would likely result from 20 units being built, vis-a-vis, and any impact it may have on the traffic in that area that would cause harm to people?
Okay. So if you look at the short answer is yes. And if you look at
what is that evidence?
Okay. And so if you look at Mr. Trinkus's report, he discusses the conflicts between the ability of the Milford Fire Department to gain access to the property. And so one, additional crowding from parking and traffic may inhibit the ability of fire or safety vehicles getting access because, one, the streets are unusually narrow. There's parking already that's overcrowded, and adding additional parking to that area is a conflict.
Okay. And that opinion differs from the fire department's opinion. Is that correct?
Apparently, I don't know if they specifically opined on that, but they apparently said that they can get access to the building.
Okay, so there's a differing opinions there. Is that accurate?
There are differing opinions.
Okay, thank you.
Attorney Hollister.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, other than some brief concluding remarks, the applicant has nothing more to present on the application, so I don't know if you want to go to public comment, but at some point I just need 2 minutes to wrap up.
Well, if you could just, for me, address the fire marshal's report that is contained in Mr. Thompson's report, when the fire marshals determined there was no major outstanding issues regarding public safety. Could you address that, please?
I don't have the fire marshal's report in front of me, but I certainly understand, agree with, and advocate that the fire department, the police department, and the city engineer all weighed in reviewing the traffic situation, including emergency vehicle access and the ability of emergency vehicles and fire trucks to get to the site and perform their response function, And so we think that that should be conclusive as to that issue.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions before he wants to sum up? Okay, thank you. I'll give you a minute to, whatever time you need to get up, get your materials.
Okay, thank you. Just to conclude very briefly, reminder that we're only talking about site plan here. There's no zone change, there's no special permit. It is a redevelopment from 9 existing units that are in need of repair to a new building with 20 units in it. In summary, the plan has been reviewed by every city department and official expressing no concern. Whenever we propose an 830G, so what some people call the negative justification is that there's no basis for denial. There has to be evidence in the record of a substantial public health or safety concern, and a difference of opinion or anything else you've heard does not fall into that category. So let me end more positively, which is that the applicant, at the end of the day, did its homework. Mr. Wee-Way, Mr. Gordon, Mr. Ullman, I think they all did use their expertise and the information available to them and Mr. Gardner, the architect who spoke on October 3rd, to put together a very nice plan, architecturally, engineering-wise. It works, and we think it will be a substantial, very substantial improvement to the lot in question and a nice addition to the neighborhood. So with that, I thank you for your patience. I apologize again for my crazy voice, but thank you for your patience in listening to me this evening.
Thank you. Does the intervener have any statement to make before we go to comment by the public?
I've made a couple of notes that I wanted to make a couple of comments on, but I'll try to be really brief. There was a comment made that, we didn't quantify anything, we didn't do calculations. Neither did they. They just used a design manual to come up with a design. We have an opinion by our engineer who says that there needed to be a pollutant loading calculation, and they didn't do it either. So they're saying we didn't do our homework and come up with calculations. They said they just didn't need to do it. So we have a difference of opinion of experts on that. And they said, we also made assumptions. Well, so did they. Their calculations, they assumed that the averages and the volumes were correct for this site, but they didn't do a pollutant load for this site to determine if the system would work as designed. And let's see. Oh, there was a slight suggestion that that our petition was based on it was dated before the report. Yeah, that's true, but my client had access to the preliminary version of the report, so he didn't make it up. The suggestion otherwise is really not kind of fair. Yes, the report was dated November 6th. That's when it was transmitted to me. But the preliminary version of that was available to Mr. Fuchs before then, and there were no substantial changes after that time. So, or at least nothing that would have affected his intervention petition. But other than that, I think we presented our position.
Thank you very much. So, ladies and gentlemen of the public here, all are welcome. We'd love to hear what you have to say if you wish to. And before you can start walking up, but the thing that I want to recognize tonight is the respectful civility that we've had. And that's very important, because what we need from everybody that wishes to speak to us is giving us facts that we can use to decide and make a very tough decision. So we can start. Again, as you heard, the fire presenter's name and address, please. And
yes, Robert Fuchs, 17 Shell Ave. And you might have to indulge me a little bit. I have hearing aids, so you may have to speak up. I don't know if I can hear you as well as I'm able to.
This is really not a back and forth, Mr. Fuchs. We're going to listen to what you have to say.
Okay.
I mean, there'll be no questions from us, but thank you.
First of all, I'd like to tell the panel that this action was brought upon by not just myself. I'm on the paperwork, but this is the entire street of Shell Avenue. This is not Bob Fuchs, this isn't Nancy Herman, this isn't Dan Walby, this is all of us. And it's nice to hear experts, it's nice to hear attorneys, it's nice to hear engineers, it's nice to hear traffic people, but guess what? They don't live on Shell Avenue. They live elsewhere, and they are using whatever means they can to kind of figure out what could or should be. Well, we live there. We've been there 23 years, and the people that are going to speak after me have been there even longer. This was brought upon a suit, or whatever you want to call it, because we're fearful, we're scared, we want to be safe. And I'm actually going to take this and not even bother, because I have to speak from my heart. This complex, 20 units on a small, narrow street that has some parking, half the street has no parking, the bottom half of the street has no parking. It's narrow and it's small. So what are we going to do? No, I get it. I get the 830G. I understand that. I don't agree with it, but I understand it. We are going to allow, or it could be allowed, 20 units, over 30 bedrooms on this site, which, if there are 2 people inhabiting each unit, that's 40 cars. Do people have children or roommates that could drive? Let's assume worst case, because I heard a lot of that tonight. Worst case scenario, worst case. Well, I'm going to give you the worst case scenario. The worst case is that everyone has 3 cars in those 20 units. Very possible. My wife and I have 3 cars, and maybe in your family you might have 3 cars, but there's only 2 of you. The developer is not going to tell people you can't have 2 cars, you can't have 3 cars, you can't have 4 cars. So let's assume, worst case, everyone has a car. 20 units, 3 cars, that's 60 cars. Right off the bat, if we go worst case. Now we have visitors. Wintertime. Shell Avenue is a street of, it's 2 streets. It's a street from November till April, and it's a street from mid-April to mid-October. It's Cape Cod in the winter, and it's Cape Cod in the summer. So now we have 20 units, possibly 60 cars. It's not out of the question, that we have 60 cars. They get visitors. 20 visitors, why not? Now that's 80 cars, and that could be off-season. Now it's summertime, it's direct waterfront. We are inundated constantly with people parking on our street, and it's very little area to park, by the way. You could have another 20 cars. So you can take all of these statistics and all of these studies and all of these. I'd like to see what 1.7 cars look like. I don't know. I've never seen 0.7 of a car. I don't think you probably have either. We could have 100 cars coming and going there. Hello, it's a tiny little narrow street. It's possible that something could happen. We have walkers, we have joggers, we have kids right across the street. The Welbys have 3 little girls that play in their basketball every day in the street and in their yard. We have elderly, we have joggers, we have people running races. Shell Ave is a very busy street, small, tiny, but very busy. And to put the possibility of having, and again, worst case, 100 cars on July 4th from that building alone is ridiculous. It's unsafe. And everyone that you're going to hear behind me, and you know, the environment is wonderful, okay? We all love it. I'm as green as you can be. But we didn't think of the environment when we started this. We thought of our safety. We thought of our family's safety, our pets' safety, our elderly safety. We all care about the environment, I get it. And I only hired the engineer because we had to rebut their engineer. We're scared. And I'm kidding you. We are very scared. And everyone that's going to come up here is going to tell you because they all live on the street. He can't tell you. Those two guys can't tell you. None of them can tell you because they don't live there. In our driveway, we have a driveway that has room for plenty of cars. Most houses on Shell Avenue have a driveway that handles 2 cars, but a lot of them 1 car. Our cars in our driveway have been hit 3 times by people pulling in to back up or to turn around. And I could produce those bills if necessary. So my point is, again, I wrote this treatise that, Shakespeare could have written it. Well, he couldn't have because I made a lot of mistakes. But it's safety, safety, safety. And we know with the affordable housing law, or whatever it is, statute, that your path to put this project to bed or down is very narrow. You have safety, welfare, and the environment. That's what you got. Unfortunately, they could build this thing 100 feet tall. You can't do anything about it. They could build it they don't have to take up this, they could take up the entire lot. You have nothing to say about it. That is wrong. That's got to change. But that's the way it is. We got to live with it. Okay? But having the possibility of 60, 80 cars, 4 cars an hour? Are you crazy? There are 4 cars an hour coming in and out of our driveway alone. The statistics that's exactly what they are. It's like baseball with analytics. Okay, it all sounds good, but in reality, we live there. And honestly, I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't concerned. I'd have no axe to grind, and hello, Margaret, I know she's watching this. I have no axe to grind with her. She's in business. She wants to make money. This is a profit deal. This has got no concern for the neighborhood, and she lives around the corner, which is even more mind-boggling. But guess what? You can't park in front of their house because Fort Trumbull Drive, you got to sit in your car or you get it towed or ticketed. So why don't we have parking on Fort Trumbull Drive? That's another story. But we're scared, and unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, we all sat here for 3.5 hours while another matter was being listened to. And a lot of the people that would have been here tonight are celebrating Thanksgiving elsewhere. So I don't know how many people are going to be behind me. Maybe there's 4, maybe there's 10. We have letters. But trust me, we are fearful. And it's your job and your duty to protect us, to protect the citizens and the taxpayers of Milford, not to make a developer rich. And this is all about the money. It's plain and simple. Best attorneys, best this, best that, deep pockets. But we are scared. And I hope the people behind me, and there are letters that you guys can read. I get all the other stuff, and I didn't even understand most of it because that's not my deal, and probably you didn't either. That's my guess. But trust me when I say this project is an accident waiting to happen. That street is this wide, and you're going to have 60 or 80 cars in there all summer long, coming and going. And when some kid gets hit or some elderly person gets run over in their walker, and there's plenty of them on the street, Milford's going to have a lawsuit that's going to turn this whole town around because this isn't right. But she does, Margaret, she has alternatives. And she has 4, in my opinion. One alternative is to cut the project down. Not 20 units, 10 units, 8 units, but there's not enough money in that. Knock the building down that's there, knock it down, build 3 mansions, 2 mansions, multi-million dollars, direct waterfront, best spot in Milford. She could do that. She could keep the existing building and rehab it, put condos. But she wanted to do that last year. The problem is that she wanted to add 10,000 square feet onto a non-conforming building and build a double-decker parking garage that was mechanized. It's crazy. You guys stopped it in its tracks. But I will tell you, the people that are behind me and all the people that signed on for this would certainly love to sit down with her and come up with a compromise. And if it means revisiting her condo project last year with the existing building, we would be all for talking to her about modestly adding on to that
Mr. Fuchs,
building.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Okay,
could you
not
concentrate
10,000
on
square
this
feet.
particular project? Thank you.
But that's it for me. But we would love to talk to her, but she has options. This isn't it. This isn't the option. Thank you for your time.
Hello. Not a city planner or a lawyer or an engineer, but I
Give a
am.
name.
Name and address, please.
Pardon me?
Your name and
Oh,
address.
I'm getting there. Nancy Herman. I live at 33 Shell Avenue, which is right next door to 25, in a home that was built by my great-grandparents in 1895, I believe, and which I currently own with my cousin Ann Blake. And I'm a lifelong Milford resident, and I love my home and I love my neighborhood. And I want to be clear, I personally have no issue with developing this property next door, fixing it up, taking it down and putting something else up. I do take issue with the number of units. You've heard this before. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself or repeating what you've heard, but these are my remarks. So currently there are 9 units on the property. 7 of them are studio apartments, so they're small. I've been in them, I've seen them, and the other 2 are larger apartments. The impact of so many new residences on Shell Avenue, I think, would be dangerous and disruptive to our neighborhood. Shell Avenue, as was mentioned, is a very narrow street, especially at the bottom end of the street. It doesn't even have sidewalks, and there's no room to put sidewalks. It's an everyday occurrence that cars have to sort of jockey and negotiate to get by one another. And if you add in delivery vehicles, which are there often, mail trucks, lawn service trucks, sometimes the street becomes a parking lot itself. And then, of course, there are walkers, bikers, pedestrians, people pushing baby carriages, and every race, which we love, that comes through Milford, comes down Shell Avenue. And it can be a very hazardous situation. I just can't help but think that adding 11 more residences on this one piece of property will make the traffic situation on our street even worse. You've heard also about the parking. It is a grave concern, especially during the spring and summer months. The street is lined with cars, and some are guests, some are residents, and some are people circling the block looking for a place to park. And the reason is that this little street, Shell Avenue, has 3 public accesses to the beach, which is great. I think people should be able to go to the beach in Milford. But it also means that people need to park and then take their chairs so they can go down to the public access. So we're not just talking about people who live on the street. We're talking about other Milford residents who want to use the beach. And I'm happy to welcome them there, but it's a lot more cars. It becomes dangerous for pedestrians. And I have to be honest, I think I'm one of those elderly that Bob was talking about, but when I try to back out of my driveway, if the street is lined with cars, it's a little tricky. And if there's a truck parked across the street, which there often is, it's Amazon or it's whatever, it can be kind of hairy. You know, I have to have sometimes my husband out there saying, look out for that walker, look out for that jogger, be careful, okay, now you can go. It can be kind of difficult. And I do wonder how, even without this, how a fire truck or an emergency vehicle would navigate all of this. And I know you've heard all about the environmental issues relative to this project. I'm not an expert, so I won't bring that up, but I do want to basically finish up by imploring you to consider Milford's most valuable resource, and that is our beautiful coastline. and recognize that this proposed expansion, its size, its height, its environmental impact, and all of the accompanying traffic that it will bring is really out of keeping with the character of the street and of the overall neighborhood. So again, I would welcome some development to that property, but 20 units is just overwhelming. Thank you very much.
Hi there. I'm Sue McNulty from 46 Shell Avenue, and I wanted to substantiate parking. So our peak parking time is the 4th of July. So every house on the street, and I think there's over 40 houses, we have an apartment building at the end, and we have a condo complex at the end, and then we have 25 Shell Avenue, which is also an apartment building. So if every house has an extra 10 people for the 4th of July, including each of those units, that's peak. And that's when it really, really becomes dangerous relating to safety on the street. So really, please consider that peak. What you see now isn't what it is, or any statistic that was belted out earlier. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Welby. I live at 28 Shell Ave. Bob actually mentioned was the one with the 3 kids playing basketball all day long, it seems, which, of course, is one of the reasons and main reasons why I'm so nervous about this project and the health and safety of not only my kids, but the people walking. I just brought several notes. I won't take too long, but the things that obviously, a traffic study, yes, that needs to be done because, determining the traffics. I still am very confused on the analytics and the averages they're using to, to actually pinpoint reality on our street. There's a lot of variables that don't seem to be being brought into these, studies or analytical patterns that are nationwide. But foot traffic, why didn't we do a foot traffic study? Just to show the volume. When I was here last time I talked, I counted, 46 people walking up and down the street or biking up and down a street on a sunny day. Okay? So that's a high value, and that's in the fall. Imagine the summertime, right? But no one looked at the foot traffic. No one did, which is very odd to me when we're talking about health and safety of people walking down the street or, using the street for recreational use. The other thing that's interesting is we talk about, all right, if there's 30, 40, how many cars are there? Today's day and age, did anyone get the stats on how many more Amazon trucks that is? Because I'm telling you now, there's an Amazon truck in front of my house, either at my house or next door neighbors or across the street, at least 2 or 3 times a day. So the law of averages everyone using, is that a 40% increase to that? More Amazon trucks, more deliveries, more Ubers, more, Uber Eats, right? More deliveries. That's going to increase. I didn't see any mention about that yet on there. Peak hours. I see 6 cars drive out in the morning, every morning, around those peak hours. So now, I guess the average is now we're going to have 10, if that's accurate. Okay? So again, they're saying, oh, it's only 4, but add to what is already there. That's what people are forgetting to add, right? They're not doing the math really correctly for everyone here. The other thing that was interesting is I didn't see any pictures, meaning actually depicting what it looks like to drive down the street and having a lawn service truck and a car parked here. I don't know if it's appropriate, but I have it right here to show you what it looks like. Does anyone want to just, I don't know if it's appropriate, whatever, but at least it gives you a perspective of what it actually looks like to be driving and how narrow it is.
I don't know how we're going to put that into the record.
He's going. He's going to have to mail it. He's going to have to email the photo to us.
And I 100%, Ken. These emails, these pictures were delivered to several people that did studies. I don't know if they used them or not.
Thank you.
So I can email this picture. I can even show everyone. They can pass the phone around. Doesn't matter because it's obvious. This is my street. This is me driving. This is my car. But it shows how narrow that is. That was interesting that that wasn't in any of the studies that I saw. The other thing is, at the end of the day, it really comes down to the safety of the people, my kids, the people walking up and down the street. It's already hectic. And the funny thing is, I hear about these car accidents, and there's only one. I know for a fact, because I was there for 2 times where the cops came, one drunk driver wiped out 3 cars in one swoop, basically. Yet that has not been, no one's talked about that once. There was 8 cop cars there and a state police officer. Okay, I don't know why that is not in there. And another one, my neighbor backed out and smashed into our friend's car. Cops came for that one. Why isn't that being reported? It doesn't make sense. So anyways, I just want to say, at the end of the day, it's 100%. I am quite nervous about this is going to happen to anyone just walking up and down the streets, but more importantly, what this means to my kids playing basketball and having fun out in the street and trying to enjoy, the outdoors instead of playing video games all day. So thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Vin Bagdasarian, and I'm from 27 Thompson Street, so I don't live on Shell Ave. I'm a couple blocks away. Now, I walk by that place a lot. It's right in my neighborhood, and there's a lot more traffic than they're talking about. We all know that. What about the other, 7 or 8 830Gs that you have in my neighborhood, and it all funnels up, Seaside Avenue? But you don't add those all together when you're looking at this stuff, but it's all there. It's inappropriate. I mean, that's absurd. And we all know that. We all know common sense. This is absurd. It has no business there. But, how do you fight it? You look at it and you say, well, the traffic is obvious, right? The health and safety is obvious. The pollution and all that is quite obvious. It must be an 830G. One of the requirements are low-income housing. This is direct waterfront luxury stuff. They're not doing any low-income stuff right here. That's pretty obvious, but they're going to try pulling that off, right? Now, I know for some of the 830Gs they've put around town, they take one house with a big backyard and you put 40 units in there. It's ridiculous. But, here you've got 9 units already. So it's not like there's an economic problem. I looked at this place to buy it myself. If I had a couple of mil, I'd have done it. But not all of us have that in our back pocket. Too bad. Because I would have loved something like this. It needed a little TLC, put some nice decks on there and stuff like that. That building is a classic building, mansard roof, the whole bit. That has some architectural significance to it and some historical significance. We're not taking that into account, and I think you should. That's an important part of the neighborhood, and the way it is now, it's just needs a little TLC, and I think it would be a real nice addition to the neighborhood. But this is absurd, and shame on you guys for bringing this up. Seriously, you ought to be ashamed of yourself proposing something like this. Thank you.
Sir, if we just keep the comments to the board, please. That's the most important. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I appreciate the time you're spending to listen to us. I just want to make a few comments. Of course, I agree with everything
Could you give us your name and address, please?
Excuse me?
Name and address,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry. Dan Howard, 18 Shell Avenue. I'm directly across from the Fuchs family. I just want to mention 1 or 2 things. I'm retired for 19 years, and I spend a lot of time sitting on my porch. And one of the big problems I see, and this is not just on weekends, it's from the time of May to September, a lot of people come down to Shell, park on Shell Avenue, walk down to the corner to go to the beach at Fort Trumbull. And there's no parking on Shell at all, during the week at times. And when my kids come to visit me, what I have to do, I have a 2-car driveway. I pull my car up on my lawn so they can get a parking space. And of course, I'm willing to let Margaret build a building. I have nothing against that. I think if we could reach some type of agreement where she would reduce the number of units she wants, everybody would be happy. And I appreciate your time, but I really agree with all the other things that people have said. And what Bob mentioned is my driveway, I have a lot of cars pull up there, turn around and go back because they're looking for parking spaces. In fact, one day I was sitting there and somebody parked in my driveway, turned off the ignition, and sat in the car on their phone reading a book. So it is what it is. And thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Patrick Callahan at 10 Seaside Avenue. A couple points. I live in the condominium that's right on the corner of Seaside and Shell. We have a private parking lot for the unit owners. We have 9 units, and we have spaces within our private parking lot for the 9 unit owners. And there's signs posted everywhere about private property and no parking. Those signs are not respected. People are parking our lot all the time. All the time. It's private property. It's clear it's private property. There's a large hedge. There's pillars. It's obvious this is not public. But for some reason, people park there all the time. And whenever I get a chance to catch them, it's always, there's no parking. There's no parking. We want to go to the beach. There's no parking. Now, that's how it is now. Before you add these additional 11 apartments, that's how it is now. The parking's so bad, people have the nerve to park on private property. I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration. The second thing is, none of us here are objecting to this property being redeveloped. We think it needs to be redeveloped. Honestly, it's an eyesore and it's poorly maintained currently. The two extremes are what we have currently, which is really unacceptable and really needs to be improved, and the 20-unit apartment that's jammed onto the small piece of property. Neither one of those options are acceptable to anyone. There is an acceptable middle ground, which I think can be reached. There are some conversations. Some neighbors have reached out to the developer to try to have some conversations, but she's waiting for your move, okay? Because if you say no or make it difficult, she'll be more willing to discuss that middle ground. And that middle ground is where we need to be, okay? I think we're all in agreement that we don't have a problem with developing it, but there's a middle ground that can be reached. And the third thing that I'd like to bring up is the precedent that you're setting to allow the 20 units to be on this small piece of property. Our piece of property is at least twice as large, probably 3 times as large. Based on that math, if I got together with the 9-unit owners and I said, let's sell our property, sell it to a developer, we could put 55 apartments here. Let's do the back door. Let's put the finger on, put our thumb on the scale. Let's do the back door. Let's make them 830G, and then nobody can do anything about it. And you'd have to take the 55. You know why? Because you just allowed 20, 2 blocks over. And across the street from us is another apartment building that could put another 20 apartments right on the water. This is all waterfront. We could sell it. They could sell it. Do you know how many places in this town would really suffer? If you set a precedent that allows this, there'll be developers buying a property everywhere, jamming as much on there as they could, and use 830G as our cover. 830G is our back door. We can always get it jammed down their throat because P&Z's hands are tied, okay? So don't set the precedent. I recommend that you don't approve this. Have the developer meet and discuss the middle ground that can be achieved, and I believe there's a middle ground that can make us all happy. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a question because it's the holiday for Thanksgiving.
The thing is, if you could give us your name
sure.
and your address, please.
My name is Deborah Fuchs, and I live at 17 Shell Avenue. I have some letters from some of the neighbors that had to be out of town because of the holidays.
If you want to give those to Mr. Sulkus, you can do that, and you can speak. But if you want to submit letters in addition to what we already have, we'll take that after you're speaking.
Thank you, because everybody wanted to be here, but unfortunately they were here 2 weeks ago, and because of the holiday, a lot of people had to be out of town. I also have postcards of the property and the shoreline from over 100 years ago, like 2 centuries ago. I'd like to give also. I don't want to bore you by going over what everybody else said, but I totally agree with everything that was said. Last year, Ms. Stryker came along, she bought the property, and she came along and wanted to expand it from 9 apartments to 9 condo units, done by Ray Oliver. It was a beautiful building, except for the garage, which is what we objected to. Actually, we signed off on her variance for it before we knew about the garage, and that's what we objected to. She did say that she would forget the garage when she saw that it wasn't.
I don't mean to interrupt you,
Yes.
but please address the application. That what happened in the past
doesn't
is really not
count.
relevant
Okay.
to our decision tonight. I
Well,
appreciate that.
the reason this is up now is because her last one was denied. But this is just totally, it's a unique piece of property. It's direct beachfront. It's front and center to our harbor. Everybody that from Maine to Florida that comes by in a boat sees our shoreline. And I agree with Pat. If this goes through, what's going to stop other developers from buying up beachfront property and putting up, I don't know, 5, 10, 15-story buildings to turn it into A1A in Florida? Right now we have, our shoreline profile has been the same for hundreds of years. And I could just see it just going away. And a lot of our business, our revenue that comes into town come from visitors and boaters and whatnot, but also the safety issue. People on Shell Avenue, East Broadway is part of the East Coast Greenway that goes from Maine to Florida. So there are people that travel that and walk it and bike it, and they come on our street. They kind of come, they follow the shoreline route. So East Broadway, they'll come onto Shell, and then they get back onto East Broadway. But we have all kinds of like 5K races. The last one we had was the Trick or Trot on October 28th. That was like 110 people, like adults and children. This sort of thing goes on all year on our street. And the street is really narrow. So when you see people walking, as Dan mentioned, all the people walking, dogs and baby carriages and riding bikes and whatnot, everybody walks in the middle of the street because the sidewalks are small, they're broken. So most people are in the street. I have pictures and videos, if anybody'd like to see them, of just a couple hours of people just back and forth in the street, and forget the sidewalk. It's like 99% of the people use the street, especially at the far end of the street, which has no sidewalks. Which, by the way, we just got an alert that our street flooded. So to watch out for flooding at the end of Shell. I don't know if you realize this, but the water that collects at the bottom of Shell at the other end goes directly to Silver Sands. So that's impacting the wetlands over there. I have some paperwork on that. I don't have it with me, but I could produce that. But that's where the water that when the floods come goes. And also speaking about water, we live right next door, and we've lived there for 22 years. When there's a big storm, the water will come right up to the wall. It'll come up over the wall and hit the lawn. This building is like, there's no green space left here. It's like right up to the seawall practically. Like if you look at Trumbull Ave, Sandy just kind of took away like all that. It just dug, the water came and just undermined the whole street. It cost Milford $10 million to repair that after Sandy. Another thing is that right now we have 9 units, and we're handling 9 units pretty well. I'm pretty friendly with some of the tenants there, and they actually complain about the parking, that they don't have enough for their people that come. If this gets built, I don't think anyone mentioned, 4 spaces are going to be taken away in front of this building for parking. So 4 spaces of parking that are there now will be gone. And the tenants all have like gas grills, picnic tables, and they use this lawn. I mean, that's not the picture of the lawn, but it's a huge, rolling, beautiful lawn. Everybody uses it. I don't know what's going to happen with 20 units, 32 bedrooms. Where are these people going to go outside and grill? There's a tiny little piece of green that's going to be left. Are you going to put gas grills on the sand? Like the water, is that even safe? I don't think so. I mean, to make the building a little bigger would be fine. I'm also worried about I noticed there are balconies on the back of the building that are facing the 10-foot setback that goes from the street almost to the seawall. There are all balconies coming out. There's a huge telephone pole and utility pole at the end of that driveway. So first of all, trying to get a big fire truck when there's a lot of traffic, that people park right up to the street sign past where they're supposed to be. Sometimes when you're trying to get out of Shell to turn onto Seaside, you can't see any cars coming. You have to wait for cars to go by because there's not enough room to take that turn with another car coming. If there are cars all parked and there's an emergency, I don't see how any fire truck is going to be able to come down Seaside, turn onto Shell, and with that giant pole, turn into a 10-foot section, a little, I don't even know if it's going to be paved or not. Apparently, there's going to be trash receptacles there. And with balconies sticking out, how are they going to, I think that's very dangerous. I don't know if the fire marshal went down to take a look at it, but if any of you have ever been down there and taken a look at it, I think you would see that it is a very small street. It's a very busy street. We, like you heard from everybody else, it's a ton of traffic. And it's a very unique piece of property. And the statistics that are being touted here, things on paper sound wonderful, but they don't translate to real life the way things really are. So 1.7 cars, I mean, most people have a car, like every couple has 2 cars. And like they said, if there are children or if they're roommates, they'll have extra cars. 32 parking spaces isn't even close to taking care of that. And also, like they said, Trumbull Ave has enough room for 50 cars to park on it, yet there's no parking on that street. So, I mean, that might be a solution, but I don't know. Anyway, I think that's about it. Thank you.
Would you make sure that you get the materials you wished, the petition, and did that go to Mr. Sulkus? Thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Sulkus, we have a little bit of a break here. I'm not done yet. I believe you went to the back and you spoke with one of the speakers who had a photo on his phone. Is that going to be sent to you?
Yeah, he's emailing it to me, yes.
It'll be part of the record?
It'll be part of the record.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, are there anybody else that wishes to speak at this particular hearing? My memory from October was there was an administrative summary that was read to the members of the board, but it appears that there is now a updated summary dated November 21st. Is that the one that we have on this, or November 8th?
I have it updated. It's November 6th.
Okay. Oh, continue to do, and then is that the one that was read to the board, the administrative summary?
This would be the updated one because the original summary would have been for the October 3rd meeting.
Okay, so if you could highlight any differences you perceive to see between the one we already heard and this most recent one?
In this particular report, we did a comparison of the R7.5 zone standards. So basically, it's the lot and building standards of section 3.14. So it's a comparison of what the zone allows and then what the proposed conditions are.
Okay.
So it's basically just calling out the various measurements that would be on your plan sets if you weren't looking at your plan sets.
And this is up on page 3 of the November 6th, 2023?
And then, it also goes into just a more detail into the parking that's being provided and how it either complies or doesn't comply with our own parking regulations, which need to be changed to be compliant with state statutes.
If I could just interrupt for a minute.
Sure.
To the other members of the board, does anybody need to have Mr. Sulkus read more? I think we all have it. Most of us have it right in front of us. Okay? That seem all right? Thank you.
You're welcome.
Attorney Hollister, there appears to be nobody else who wants to speak in favor or against. So you have a right to rebut what comments you wish to make. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no no need to respond to the neighbors. I've been doing this for a long time. I've heard a lot of neighbor testimony. It tends to be the same general themes, but I'll just leave it at that. The only thing I wanted to mention to Mr. Sulkus is remember when on October 3rd, the applicant agreed to do one of the 2 fourth-floor units as affordable. So your administrative summary doesn't reflect that, but that was something from the last time. Thank you.
Just don't leave yet, please. I had a question on that. I think that the chair at the time, Mr. Quish, was asking you questions. Would you explain that a little bit more? The size of it, was it 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, and which level of affordability that upper floor you're talking about was, please? Just to help us memory, and also some members were not at the meeting, possibly.
Okay. Mr. Sulkus had commented on the distribution of the units that will have maximum income and maximum rent restrictions, and he pointed out that, and remembering that this is an initial designation which can change over time, but he said that we should do 2 of the 4 fourth-floor 2-bedroom units as affordable, and as a compromise, we said we would do 1. But again, at the end of the day, it is an initial designation, because it can change over time as the affordable unit. As someone goes over income, they can stay, they can move, so the affordable units shift within the building over time. So, but we said we would do 1 fourth-floor unit. So then there'll be at least 1 unit on each floor.
Thank you. So at this point in the proceedings, Mr. Sulkus, could you tell the board, please, if a vote was held tonight, what the requirements would be, and if they're different for the intervenor findings, or are they the same?
If the board closes the hearing tonight, and if the board decides to vote tonight, you actually have to vote on 2 things. First, you would have to vote on the intervenor and whether or not the arguments were compelling, and whether or not changes should be recommended to the plan based on the intervenor.
I agree with that. We're just trying to figure out the numbers.
Right. Are you talking about the number of the vote?
Yeah. The number
Simple majority.
of those present, or of the
Of everyone of those present.
Okay. Yeah. And we have 7 members.
We can't hear you.
Oh. Point is, we need 4 of the 7 to be affirmative and pass a motion. That's the majority?
No, you need, you have, so yeah, you would need a majority of those here. So if there are, how many are?
7.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if,
That's 4.
Yeah.
Do we have, and we do have a closing date, which is tonight. We would have all members that have heard this. I don't have the minutes of what October 8th was. I know that one member that's present and able to vote tonight, if he so wishes, that would be Mr. Anderson. Do you feel that you have enough information to be able to make a vote tonight if there's a motion?
Mr. Sadi, in response, I have read all of the pertinent documents, and I watched the online MGAT hearing.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Anderson.
You're welcome.
So the question we have is whether there's a motion to close the hearing.
Motion to close the hearing.
Mr. Kalajian made that. And the second is with Mr. Mortimer. Is there any further discussion on the motion to close the hearing? I'm looking to my left. Mr.
What will be the effect if we do not close the hearing? What would happen then?
The applicant would, because this is the last night, the clock has run out for you for the hearing. The applicant would have to agree to give you an extension of time for you to close the hearing if you don't do it tonight. If the applicant chooses not to give you an extension of time, then I would recommend that you would vote for this and deny it, because without that, it would be an automatic approval.
Well, who is the applicant? The reason because I ask is now we have an intervener. So do they not constitute an applicant?
No, they don't. They're an intervener. They're not an applicant.
Okay.
Mr. Sulkus, could you repeat what you just said?
Okay. When we have an application, there's a certain amount of time that you have to hear the application. There's a certain amount of time for you to render a decision. So because this application came in so long ago and because there's been delays, we have been granted an extension to this evening by the applicant to allow you to finish your public hearing process. That expires after tonight. So unless tonight the applicant gets up and says to you that they will extend the public hearing until December 5th, your next meeting, if they do that, then you're fine. You can keep the hearing open if you want to. If they choose not to give you that extension, then I recommend that you vote to deny the application, because if we run out of time and if he doesn't give us the extension, it's an automatic approval.
Thank you.
Okay, Meg, if we can take the vote, please, on the motion to close the public hearing.
Mr. Anderson.
With the motion.
Mr. Hirsch.
With the motion.
Mr. Cater.
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer.
With the motion.
Mr. Zagorides.
With the motion.
And Vice Chairman Sadi.
I am with the motion. So the public hearing is now closed. There are 2 motions that may have to be made. At this point, I'm going to make a motion pursuant to 22-18 of the Planning and Zoning Board scope of review that we find that the intervener has met his burden of proof in that the proposed activity will or is reasonably likely to cause unreasonable pollution of the state's air, water, or other natural resources, and there are prudent and feasible alternatives to the proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on this particular motion?
Mr. Sadi, the question, again, just because this is so strange and I've never done this before. The question is whether the intervener has met their burden of proof that this project as presented to us is it a likelihood of causing harm to essentially Connecticut, the Long Island Sound? I mean, is it more likely than not? Is it preponderance? Is it clear and convincing evidence? What is that standard?
I can't give you advice on that, but if you listen to the intervener, he indicated when he first spoke that he has to provide substantial evidence, and I indicated by reading the statute that the proposed activity will or is reasonably likely to cause unreasonable pollution of the state's air, water, or other natural resources, and two, there are prudent, feasible alternatives for proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources. Anybody have any comments they wish to make regarding the motion that I did make?
So we're voting on whether the intervener did his job to our satisfaction, basically.
Pursuant to the burden that he has, that's accurate.
Not on the data or his evidence he presented would cause us to deny the application. Just that he met the standard of.
Well, he has to meet a standard to.
They're separate?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Sulkis.
just to help, hopefully to clarify some things, it's a two-pronged test. It's did he present you with evidence that there is reasonably likely a cause that's unreasonable that is going to cause pollution, and there's something that is environmentally sensitive. But at the same time, in making that claim, did the applicant, or did the intervener in this case, offer you prudent and feasible alternatives to the proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources, because this is from the state, so all of those things. So if you believe that he did that, okay, but if you believe he didn't, based on the motion, if you believe he did that, you should approve the motion. If you believe that he didn't do that, then you should vote against the motion.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to make any other comments? Mr. Hirsch?
So did he prove that some type of a prudent, reasonable alternatives? And can somebody here articulate what those prudent, reasonable alternatives were?
We would have to find those either proven and coming from the record that we have.
You did mention different filtration systems would be preferable to asphalt. I guess that's.
It seems to me it was
Listen, there's a motion and there's a second. If you think he met his burden, vote yes. If he didn't meet his burden, vote no.
But we're having
we have
this.
to talk about what the burden is.
Yeah, but we're not talking burden now. We're talking about what was presented to us and what that means. Well, we're talking. Right, but we're discussing the facts underlying. We're discussing the evidence.
Mr. Kalita, let's all get a chance to speak. So, I'll make the following statements because it does bear for the record. I've had a chance to listen to both of the experts. I think that the expert that was presented by the applicant here gave more persuasive evidence. And clearly, I want to make it clear, it has nothing to do with traffic safety at this point. It has to do with the issue of the environment. And I suggest that my assessment of what I've heard, and I've listened to both councils speak, and I both heard the individuals speak on the issue. Mr. Weiwei, I believe, was one of the ones. And I did not find that the intervener, met his burden, that the activity will reasonably likely cause unreasonable pollution. And I do so based on the engineer's report, Mr. Podlusky, and also the deep individual, which I believe Mr. Gaucher. Even assuming that that might have been met, the prudent, reasonable alternative, feasible alternatives are clearly speculation. I find that those are clearly speculation, and I'd be voting against this particular motion. Thank you. We take the roll, please.
Mr. Anderson.
I'm voting against the motion because I believe that the intervener did in fact present some valid facts, but did not provide alternative solutions. So I'm against the motion.
Mr. Hirsch.
Against the motion.
Mr. Cater.
I'm going to vote with the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
Against the motion.
Mr. Mortimer.
I am with the motion.
Mr. Zaharides.
I'm with the motion.
Vice Chairman Sadi.
I'm with the motion, so at this point, that motion has failed.
So you just said before you took the vote that you were going to vote against the motion, because the motion was, so you changed your vote, okay.
I didn't change my vote.
Okay.
If I said with the motion, I was voting against the motion.
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Aren't the motions supposed to be presented in the positive?
Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor of the motion, and 1, 2, 3 against the motion. So the motion passes.
Can we get a recall on that vote? Because I counted 4 before I voted against the motion. You want to take another, I mean, I can tell you how people voted. I mean, I kept track.
Just, if we could, just, Meg, could you just read back the motion?
I'm sorry, I don't have the motion verbatim.
I could read back the motion because I made it. I understand. So the motion that I made before we get to this through to Mr. Collegian was made a motion that pursuant to 21A18 of the Planning and Zoning Board, that intervener did meet his burden of proof that the proposed activity will or is reasonably likely to cause unreasonable pollution of the state's air, water, or other natural resources, and there are prudent and feasible alternatives to proposed activity in order to protect the state's resources. That was a motion that I made. It was second. If I inadvertently said with the motion, I intended to always vote against the motion, but I thought that I heard 4 votes for against. That's all.
So are you saying that you would change your vote? I mean,
I misspoke when I said my vote. That's
okay.
accurate.
Okay. So then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 votes against the motion, and 1, 2, 3 votes for the motion. So the motion fails.
Okay, thank you. Now, the next is the application for 25 Shell. I will not be making the, point of order, Mr. Collegian. Sorry?
I'm willing to make a motion on the second.
Oh, okay, good, thank you very much.
I move to approve with the following modifications the petition of Timothy Hollister Esquire for an application under CS Connecticut General Statutes 830G with a site plan and camera review, construct a 20-unit residential building on map 27, block 444, parcel 16, of which Seashell LLC is the owner. Modifications that I propose: number 1, one of the 4th floor units shall be set aside as an affordable 60% of median income, and one other 4th floor unit shall be set aside as affordable at 80% of the median income level. These units, number 2, these units shall be replaced one 2-bedroom unit that was designated at 60% and one 2-bedroom unit designated at 80% of the median income found on floors 2 and 3. And number 3, the affordability plan shall be updated with the contact information for the reporting entity.
Second.
Second by Mr. Mortimer. Is there any further discussion by members to my left on the matter? Anybody on the right? I do have some comments to make. The board definitely appreciates the fact that the individuals showed up and gave their testimony both tonight and the people we heard a long time ago. Reviewed substantial materials presented by the applicant, and we've also read the letters against the proposal. We have also to consider the findings of the public officials, starting with the fire marshal and the police department, where they indicate there's not going to be a substantial issue regarding if this is granted. The comments found in the engineering report from the city engineer, Greg Podlusky, and additionally, the materials received from Department of Environmental Protection. And as many of the speakers tonight did indicate, our hands in many ways are tied by 830G. It doesn't mean that your comments fell on deaf ears. The comment is that we have limited ability to do something in this particular area. Those are the comments I make prior to the vote. Anybody has any other comments they wish to make? If not, we'll take a vote. Please make if you call the roll.
Mr. Anderson.
Against the motion.
Mr. Hirsch.
Against the motion.
Mr. Cater.
Against the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
With the motion.
Mr. Mortimer.
Against the motion.
Mr. Zaharidis.
I'm against the motion.
Vice Chairman Sadi.
I'm against the motion.
So the motion has failed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against the motion and 1 for the motion.
I believe that concludes the 25 Shell Avenue matter. So we have other business still. There's no old business that I'm aware of. Liaison reports, there is none from myself. Any other liaison reports? Subcommittee reports, I don't know anything about regulation subcommittee. POCD,
No more POCD subcommittee.
we're done with that.
Yep.
A motion for approval of the minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to abstain from that.
That's fine. Who made the motion to approve the minutes? John Mortimer, a second by Brian. Voice vote, we approve that. So the last thing on the chair's report, and myself serving as the chair, gentlemen, we have to deal with the issue of the proposed calendar for next year. We should all have received that in our materials tonight. And the thing I did note is that there, on the right side, which is the Planning and Zoning Board, which gives the dates, is that date of January 16th is the second meeting in January, and we do have November 6th is a Wednesday because of Election Day, and then we have December 3rd and 17th. So I would, unless there's no further discussion, take a motion to approve the calendar as we have before us.
Motion to approve.
Mr. Hirsch?
Second.
By Mr. Mortimer. Call the vote, please.
Mr. Anderson.
Was my abstention on the minutes
Oh, sorry.
recorded?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, sorry.
with the motion.
Mr. Hirsch. Mr. Cater.
With the motion.
Mr. Collegian.
With motion.
Mr. Mortimer.
With the motion.
Mr. Zaharides,
With the motion.
and Vice Chairman Sadi.
With the motion, is there any staff report?
None this evening.
So I want to wish everybody happy Thanksgiving. We'll see each other in December. And Brian, thank you very much for attending and being diligent, being able to vote tonight. Motion to adjourn by somebody.
Second.
Okay. Thank you.